Tonight we're exploring the entire Targaryen family tree. There is a lot to explore here, but I'll keep the pacing gentle, so you can still settle in and fall asleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Long before the Iron Throne was forged from the swords of vanquished kings, the story of House Targaryen began in the shimmering volcanic peninsula of the Valyrian Freehold. In those ancient days, they were not the sole rulers of the world, but one of 40 rival noble families, known as Dragonlords. These families ruled through sorcery, blood, and the immense power of their bonded beasts. Among these 40, the Targaryens were far from the most powerful, often overshadowed by grander, wealthier houses, whose names have long since been forgotten by history. Their destiny shifted forever, 12 years before the cataclysm that would destroy their homeland. Daenys, the maiden daughter of Lord Aenar Targaryen, was gifted with the rare and potent sight of prophecy. She foresaw a vision of pure devastation, the volcanic peaks of Valyria shattering, fire and ash consuming the grand towers, and the seas boiling away to swallow the empire whole. While others laughed at her warnings, Aenar believed his daughter. He made the fateful decision to sell his estates, gather his family, his wealth, and 5 precious dragons, and flee westward. They settled on a dark, damp volcanic island in the narrow sea called Dragonstone. It was a lonely outpost, cold and windswept, far removed from the golden luxury of the Freehold. When the doom of Valyria finally struck, obliterating the Dragonlords and their civilization in a single afternoon, House Targaryen stood as the sole survivors of that ancient, magical bloodline. For over a century, the Targaryens remained on Dragonstone, looking eastward toward the ashes of their past, rather than westward toward the fractured continent of Westeros. Aenar was succeeded by his son Gaemon the Glorious, who married his sister Daenys, preserving the Valyrian tradition of keeping the bloodline pure to maintain their bond with the dragons. From Gaemon and Daenys came Aegon and Alysanne, who ruled Dragonstone together, followed by their sons Maegor and Aerys. The lineage continued down through Aerys' sons, Aelix, Baelor, and Daemon. It was Daemon's son, Aerion, who would marry Lady Valyria of House Velaryon, a family of Valyrian descent who ruled the nearby waters. Aerion and Valyria would have 3 children, whose names would be carved into the very stone of Westeros forever: Visenya, Aegon, and Rhaenys. Aegon was a man of quiet determination, tall and powerful, who possessed the dragon Balerion, the Black Dread, a beast so massive its shadow could cover entire towns. Aegon married both of his sisters, Visenya the elder, who was stern, practical, and a warrior who wielded the Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister, and Rhaenys, the younger, who was playful, artistic, and loved to fly her dragon Meraxes more than anything else. Together, these 3 siblings looked west toward the 7 kingdoms, a land divided by warring kings, ripe for conquest. With 3 dragons and a small army, they landed on the shores of the Blackwater Rush. What followed was a campaign of fire and blood that united 6 of the 7 kingdoms under a single ruler. Aegon melted the swords of his defeated enemies in the breath of Balerion, forging the Iron Throne and establishing a dynasty that would endure for nearly 300 years. Aegon the Conqueror sought to blend his Valyrian heritage with the customs of the land he now ruled. He adopted the faith of the 7, established his capital at King's Landing, and began the construction of the grand fortress known as the Red Keep. Yet, the question of succession remained a delicate matter. Aegon had 2 sons from his sister wives, each inheriting different traits of their mothers. His firstborn son, Aenys, was born to his beloved younger sister Rhaenys. Aenys was a gentle, artistic, and sickly child who struggled to command the respect of the rough lords of Westeros. When Rhaenys tragically died in Dorne, During the First Dornish War, Aenys' health faltered further, only stabilizing when he bonded with his dragon, Quicksilver. Aegon's second son, Maegor, was born to his elder sister Visenya. Maegor was the complete opposite of his brother. He was massive, silent, and exceptionally cruel, showing an early aptitude for violence and warfare. He did not claim a dragon of his own during his youth, refusing any beast lesser than his father's great dragon, Valyrian. When Aegon the Conqueror finally passed away from a stroke on Dragonstone, the crown passed to the gentle Aenys. But Aenys' reign was immediately beset by rebellions from those who despised the Targaryen practice of sibling marriage. Struggling to maintain order, Aenys appointed his formidable half-brother Maegor as his Hand of the King, giving him the Valyrian steel sword Blackfire. This decision would set the stage for a dark and bloody chapter in the family tree, as the gentle king's early death would allow Maegor to seize the throne, earning him the terrifying title of Maegor the Cruel. Through his reign of terror and the construction of the hidden passages of the Red Keep, the dynasty would be pushed to the very brink of destruction, before a young prince named Jaehaerys would rise to restore peace and create the golden age of the realm. The Freehold of Valyria was not a kingdom in the sense that Westeros would ever understand. It was an empire of mages and masters, a sprawling oligarchy of sorcerer kings where 40 ancient families held the sole sacred right to bond with the great beasts. These 40 were the Dragonlords, the absolute rulers of the known world. Their power was absolute, their wealth incalculable, and their cities were built with a magic that could fuse stone into seamless towers that touched the sky. Yet within this council of equals, there was a strict and unyielding hierarchy. Houses like the Valyrian and the Baelor commanded immense respect, their word shaping the direction of the empire itself. They held dozens of dragons, controlled vast armies of slaves, and their bloodlines were considered the most sacred of the sacred. House Targaryen, however, was not among these grand families. Their influence was modest, their holdings confined largely to the distant volcanic outpost of Dragonstone, an island fortress on the very fringe of the empire. To the great lords of the capital city, the Targaryens were respected for their ancient blood, certainly, but they were not the families who decided the fate of nations. They were the quiet family, the keepers of the Western Gate, whose name was known, but whose voice rarely carried in the high councils of the Freehold. Their wealth was limited compared to the merchant princes of the Heartland, and their stable of dragons was small. When the doom eventually came, they possessed only 5, a number that would have been considered laughably small by the grand houses who commanded aerial armadas. They were Dragonlords in a world of Dragonlords, but they were the poor cousins, the family posted to the edge of the map, watching the sun set over a continent that was not yet theirs. The source of their power, and the source of their unique and isolating culture, was the blood itself. Valyrian magic was not merely studied or practiced, it was inherited. The bond between a dragon and its rider was a mystical covenant, sealed in fire and ancient rites. A dragon would not bow to a common man. It recognized the ancient power burning in the veins of a Dragonlord, the scent of the 14 flames in the blood. To preserve this power, the families kept their bloodlines fiercely pure and unbroken. For the Targaryens, this meant marrying brother to sister, a tradition that would define them and isolate them for centuries to come. This practice, which the faith of the Seven in Westeros would later call an abomination, was simply the way of the Freehold. They believed that the dragon's blood was a finite and fragile flame. Marrying outside the family risked diluting it, weakening the bond with their dragons, and eventually extinguishing their power entirely over the course of a few generations. Marrying within the family concentrated the magic, crystallized it, ensuring that each new generation was born with the fire burning hot and bright. It was not passion alone that drove these unions. It was a cold, profound, and deeply practical understanding of their own magical nature. The Valyrians saw themselves as a separate species of ruler, standing apart from the common men they ruled. A son of a Targaryen and a Valyrian might still ride a dragon. The blood was still strong in that mixed stream, but a child born of two full-blooded Dragonlords was considered the apex of magical potential. This is why the tradition was so rigidly maintained. The dragons did not answer to just anyone. They answered to the blood of the dragon. If that blood became too thin, the great beasts would grow wild, untamable, or the eggs would simply never hatch. The family that could not hatch dragons was a family that would fade into obscurity and irrelevance. And so, while the grand houses of Valyria built palaces in the shadow of the 14 flames, House Targaryen ruled a solitary island in a cold and distant sea. Their isolation bred a certain resilience, a self-sufficiency that the great families of the capital lacked. They were far from the petty politics of the heartland, far from the decadence and the schemes that consumed the other Dragonlords. They were the first to see the omens, and the first to realize that they needed to leave. Daenys the Dreamer, the daughter of Lord Aenar, was gifted with the rare and potent sight of prophecy. In a vision of pure devastation, she saw the volcanic peaks of Valyria shattering, the fire and ash consuming the grand towers, and the seas boiling to swallow the empire whole. While the other Dragonlords laughed at the idea of their invincible homeland falling, Aenar trusted his daughter without hesitation. He made the decision that would transform his entire family. He sold his estates, gathered his household, his wealth, and his 5 precious dragons, and sailed west to the fortress of Dragonstone. This single decision, born of a dream, separated House Targaryen from their peers forever. They were no longer a family of the Freehold. They were exiles standing on the edge of the world, and when the doom struck, exactly as Daenys had foreseen, the other 39 families were erased from the annals of history. They were consumed by the fires they had once commanded, their magic turned inward, and destroying them in a single catastrophic afternoon. House Targaryen alone survived, the last living link to the age of the Dragonlords, clinging to a black stone island that spat smoke and fire into the sea. In the aftermath, a long and patient wait began on Dragonstone. The generations that followed Aenar continued their ancient traditions. They married brother to sister, as Gaemon the Glorious married Daenys, keeping the bloodline pure and the dragon bond strong. They hatched new dragons from the eggs they had saved, and they watched the eastern horizon for any sign that the old world might return. It never did. The family had been transformed. They were no longer a modest house among 40 equals, overshadowed by grander and wealthier names. They were the sole inheritors of the fire, the only Dragonlords left in all the world. In their hands alone rested the future of dragons. The weight of an entire civilization now rested on the shoulders of a single family, isolated on a cold island in the narrow sea. They looked west, toward the fractured continent of Westeros, a land of warring kings and ancient rivalries. They did not know it yet, but the age of Valyria was over, and the age of the Iron Throne was about to begin. The stage was set for a conqueror, a man who would one day take his sisters to wife, mount the greatest dragon the world had ever seen, and forge a kingdom from fire and blood. Among the 40 Dragonlord families of the Valyrian Freehold, House Targaryen was never considered the most powerful. Their wealth and influence were modest by the Empire's towering standards. They were respected, certainly, but they were not the rulers of the Freehold. They were just one of many families who bound dragons to their bloodlines through the ancient and terrible magic of their homeland. And yet, as we will see, they possessed a gift that no other Dragonlord family could claim. They had Daenys. Daenys Targaryen was the daughter of Aenar Targaryen, the head of their household in the final decades of the Empire. History remembers her as Daenys the Dreamer, a name given to her because of a singular, world-shattering vision she experienced. It was not a vague dream or a simple nightmare. It was a vivid, prophetic revelation of total destruction. She saw mountains of fire turning the sky black. She saw the sea boiling, the stone melting, and the very geography of the Valyrian peninsula being torn apart. She saw the end of the world she knew, a cataclysm that would leave nothing alive. She saw the doom of Valyria. This vision was not something she could ignore. She told her father, Aenar, everything, and Aenar made a decision that would forever change the history of the world. He believed her. Without hesitation, Aenar Targaryen began to liquidate everything his family had built in Valyria. He sold their estates, their properties, their holdings in the capital city itself. He gathered his household, his extended family, his servants, his warriors, and all of their earthly wealth. It was an act of extraordinary faith and immense risk. To abandon Valyria was to abandon their civilization. It was to be seen as a fool, a madman, or a coward by the other Dragonlords. But Aenar did not care. His daughter's word was enough, and so they left. Aenar the Exile, his family, their household, and 5 dragons. These dragons were not yet the enormous beasts of legend, but they were the future of the house. Among them was a young dragon, newly hatched or still growing, a black dragon named Valyrian. The same Valyrian who would one day be called the Black Dread, the largest dragon the world had ever seen. But at this moment, he was simply one of the 5, destined for a new home. They sailed west, away from the heart of the Empire, across the narrow sea. Their destination was a lonely volcanic island outpost on the very edge of the known world. It was called Dragonstone, a grim fortress carved from black stone, a bastion of Valyrian architecture standing alone in the sea. For generations, it had been the westernmost holding of the Freehold, a guard post against anything that might stir in the distant continent of Westeros. It was humble compared to the palaces of Valyria, but it was safe. Not long after they settled on Dragonstone, the vision came to pass. The doom of Valyria erupted with a fury that shook the very foundations of the world. The peninsula shattered, a magical catastrophe of such magnitude that it was felt from Asshai to the Wall. All the other Dragonlords, their families, their magic, their empire, were consumed in an instant. The Targaryens watched the smoke and ash from their fortress on Dragonstone, a tiny island refuge holding the last of the world's dragons. For a century, the Targaryens kept to themselves on Dragonstone. Aenar and Daenys passed, their lives fading into the mists of legend. The bloodline carried on. They did not immediately conquer Westeros. They simply existed, a small house of Dragonlords on a lonely island, watching the world, waiting for the right moment, following the drumbeat of prophecy and ambition that would one day lead them to the shores of the mainland. During this century of isolation, known to historians as the Century of Blood, the Targaryens did not look west with hunger, but rather watched the east tear itself apart. The free cities fought bitter wars for the scraps of the fallen empire, and though the Targaryens were occasionally dragged into these conflicts, their eyes eventually turned toward the sunset. The island of Dragonstone, with its obsidian walls and smoking vents, became a crucible. It was here that the last dragons bred, though only one of the original 5 survived the passage of time. That was Valyrian, who grew to a monstrous size, his wings casting shadows that could swallow entire towns. But new dragons hatched to take the place of the dead. Vhagar and Meraxes emerged from their shells, bonded to a new generation of Targaryens. This was the generation of Aegon and his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys. Aegon was a man of quiet intensity, a leader who looked at the fractured 7 kingdoms of Westeros and saw not a collection of warring realms, but a single land waiting to be forged into one. He had a grand table carved, a massive map of Westeros, with no borders painted upon it, representing his vision of a unified realm. When the time was right, Aegon would unleash the fire of the last dragons upon the 7 kingdoms, changing the course of history forever. We ended in the shadow of Dragonstone, that grim fortress carved in the shape of a dragon. Daenys the Dreamer had seen the end of the world. Aenar the Exile had believed her. They gathered their wealth, their 5 dragons, and their family, leaving behind the soaring towers and fiery mountains of the Valyrian Peninsula. They settled here on this remote volcanic island, at the western edge of the known world, far from the heart of the Freehold. For a time, they watched the horizon. The Freehold sent no word. The silence was heavy with dread, and then it came, the sudden, apocalyptic eruption of the 14 flames that shattered the Freehold and wiped out the other Dragonlords. The entire Valyrian Peninsula simply detonated. This was a volcanic event, so violently cataclysmic that the very earth collapsed into the sea. Thousands of dragons perished in an instant. The most powerful bloodlines in the world were snuffed out. The greatest civilization humanity had ever built, the roads, the spells, the swords, the empire, shattered into a smoking, boiling chain of islands. The sky across the narrow sea turned black for days. The ground trembled even on Dragonstone. It was the end of an age. In that single moment, everything changed for the family living in that western fortress. Dragonstone underwent a dramatic transformation from a remote trading post into the sole surviving bastion of Dragonlord power in the world. Think about what that meant. House Targaryen had been a moderately powerful family, but they were only one of 40 Dragonlord houses. Now they were the only Dragonlord house. The 5 dragons they brought with them were now the only dragons left anywhere in the entire world. What had been an outpost at the edge of an empire suddenly became the sanctuary containing the last remnants of an extinct dynasty of gods. Every Valyrian artifact, every spell, every dragon egg that still existed belonged to them or was lost forever. They were no longer just exiles, they were the last. But survival was not instant peace. The collapse of the Freehold triggered a century of chaos. The doom did not just kill the Dragonlords, it killed the entire power structure that held the known world together. The slave soldiers of Valyria lost their masters. The colonies in Essos were cut adrift. The free cities rose from the rubble, but they fought and bled over who would inherit the scraps of Valyrian glory. The Dothraki hordes poured out of the east, ravaging entire kingdoms. The Giscari Empire saw its chance to take revenge on the cities that had once been Valyrian subjects. It was a bloodbath that lasted about 100 years. History gives this period a name, and that name is the Century of Blood. The Century of Blood was the defining test for the early Targaryen lords of Dragonstone. They were repeatedly tempted to intervene. They could have sailed east and conquered the smoking ruins of their homeland. They could have taken a side in the endless wars between Volantis and the other free cities. They could have descended on the stepstones and carved out a new kingdom for themselves. But they resisted. The dragons stayed at home. This was a conscious, deliberate strategy. The Targaryens resisted entanglements in the free cities to focus entirely on their volcanic stronghold. They understood that sending their dragons into the meat grinder of Essosi politics would only risk their precious weapons. They had seen the doom. They knew how fragile empire could be. So they waited. They consolidated their power. They kept their bloodline pure through the strict tradition of sibling marriage. They held their dragons close and let the rest of the world bleed itself dry. Over those 100 years, the Targaryens slowly transformed. They had been Valyrian lords in exile. They began to become Westerosi lords by adoption. They married into a few of the local houses, the Masseys, the Velaryons. They learned the languages. They studied the faith. They watched the endless squabbling of the petty kings on the mainland. They saw the raw, untamed potential of a land that desperately needed a single ruler. By the end of the Century of Blood, Dragonstone was no longer a hiding place. It was a perfectly armed fortress overlooking a divided continent. And the last Dragonlord of Valyria, a young man named Aegon Targaryen, eventually looked out from his high tower and saw not a land of enemies, but a land waiting to be born. He had been given the grandest inheritance imaginable, the absolute final claim to the legacy of a fallen empire, and he knew exactly what to do with it. The dreams of Daenys had saved the house. The patience of the Century of Blood had preserved its power. Now, The time for waiting was finally over. In the wake of the doom, House Targaryen found itself utterly alone among the Dragonlords. They were no longer one of 40 powerful families jockeying for position in the Valyrian Freehold. They were the last, the only ones. On their volcanic island of Dragonstone, they watched the century of blood unfold across the narrow sea. They watched the Storm Kings, the Gardeners, the Whores, and the other kings of the First Men and the Andals fight and bleed and burn their own lands. And on Dragonstone, a new generation of Targaryens was coming of age. The head of the house was Aegon. Alongside him were his two sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys. They were, as the sigil would soon declare, the three heads of the dragon, and each head was very different from the other. Aegon is often remembered solely as the conqueror, a man of cold, implacable ambition. While he certainly possessed that ambition, it was not a hot-blooded or impulsive drive. It was a patient, calculating kind of zeal. He had a quiet, almost stern demeanor. He was not a man given to laughter or grand displays of emotion. He was a strategist, first and foremost. He would spend long hours in the Stone Drum studying maps, considering the strengths and weaknesses of every kingdom in Westeros. He understood the cost of war, and he planned to pay it only once. His dragon was Valyrian, the Black Dread, the largest and most fearsome dragon the world had seen since the fall of Valyria. Aegon was the shield, the hand that held the reins of power. He was the vision. Visenya was, in many ways, the perfect complement. She was a warrior in her own right, a woman of fierce and unyielding disposition. She was said to be tall, with a severe, haunting beauty. Where Aegon was quiet, Visenya was sharp. She could silence a room with a single glance. She was rumoured to be skilled in the darker arts, the sorcery of old Valyria. She carried the Valyrian steel blade Dark Sister, a sword designed for a woman's hand, but deadly in any. She was proud, ruthless, and fiercely loyal. She rode the dragon Vaegor, a scarred and formidable beast, nearly as vast as Balerion, seasoned by the conflicts of the Century of Blood. While Aegon provided the strategy of the conquest, Visenya provided the uncompromising will to see it through. And then there was Rhaenys. Where Visenya was martial, Rhaenys was artistic. Where Visenya was severe, Rhaenys was playful and free-spirited. She was the charming one, the graceful one. She delighted in music, poetry, and courtly love. The people of Dragonstone adored her, for her warmth was genuine. While Visenya might counsel a swift and brutal strike, Rhaenys was more likely to see the potential for a peaceful resolution, for diplomacy and mercy. But this gentleness was not weakness. She was a bold and reckless dragon rider, loving to fly low over the waves or through the clouds on her silver dragon, Meraxes. She was the heart of the three-headed dragon, the one who reminded her family that a kingdom was not just land to be taken, but people to be won. But before a single crown was taken, before a single kingdom bent the knee, Aegon prepared. The most famous symbol of this preparation sits at the top of the stone drum, in a chamber that bears its name. It is the painted table. This was no ordinary map table. It was a massive slab of oak, cut from a single tree that grew in the forests of the Reach. The table itself was carved and painted into the exact shape of Westeros, from the wall to the summer sea. Every river was marked, every mountain range, every major castle and keep. It was a complete map of the realm Aegon intended to rule, crafted meticulously before a single lord had sworn him fealty. The lords of Dragonstone would gather around it, and Aegon would point to where his armies would land, where his dragons would first strike. It was a prophecy made manifest in wood and paint, a physical assertion that the divided land could be won. The time for preparation eventually ended. The decision to launch the conquest was triggered by events on the mainland. But the intent had been crystallized on that table for years. When the moment came, Aegon gave the order. It is said that, on the night before the fleet sailed, a new banner was raised above Dragonstone. The ancient Targaryen sigil in Valyria had been a single red dragon. Now it was replaced. A three-headed dragon, breathing flames, stretched its wings against a field of black. 3 heads, 1 body, one for Aegon, one for Visenya, one for Rhaenys. 3 distinct purposes, 1 unified kingdom. And at the raising of this new banner, the new words of the house were declared for the first time as a statement of intent. Fire and blood. It was not a threat. It was a promise. It was a fact. The fleet sailed from Dragonstone and landed on the eastern coast of Westeros, at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. There was no grand city waiting for them, no throne. They built a wooden fort on the highest hill, a simple Motte and Bailey castle that would one day become the Red Keep. It was a humble beginning for a dynasty that would span 3 centuries. The war, however, had only just begun. Aegon knew that he had to prove his power was absolute. The first true test would come against the Ironborn king, Harren the Black, sitting in his massive, uncompleted fortress of Harrenhal. And it was there that the 3-headed dragon would first truly show Westeros what fire and blood really meant. The painted table at Dragonstone was more than just a map. It was a declaration of intent. Aegon Targaryen did not cross the narrow sea to rule a single island. He came to remake the entire map of Westeros, to forge a single realm out of 7 squabbling kingdoms. And he would do it with fire and blood. Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys had the ambition, the dragons, and a plan. But words on a table are just words. To make them a reality, Aegon needed a demonstration, a single devastating message that the old rules of war no longer applied. That message was delivered first to the Iron Islands. Harren the Black, king of the Isles and the rivers, had spent 40 years building the greatest castle the world had ever seen. Harrenhal, a monstrous fortress of stone and iron, a monument to his own pride. He believed its massive walls were impenetrable, that he could simply wait out any siege. But his walls were not made for dragonfire. Aegon landed at the mouth of the Blackwater, not far from where the future city of King's Landing would one day stand. He gave Harren a choice: bend the knee or burn. Harren laughed. He boasted that his castle was too strong for any fire. Aegon did not argue. He simply mounted Valyrian, the Black Dread, and flew directly over the colossal towers of Harrenhal. Valyrian breathed his flame, a jet of black and crimson fire so hot it melted stone. The towers of Harrenhal did not simply burn. They slumped, they softened, they flowed like candle wax. Harren and his entire line were roasted alive in their own fortress. It was a horrifyingly effective lesson. The burning of Harrenhal was the first great proof that stone castles offered no protection against the fury of dragonfire. Centuries of military tradition were rendered obsolete in a single night. Kingdoms that relied on their high, thick walls were suddenly vulnerable in a way they had never imagined. The entire continent took notice. The news of Harrenhal's fall sent shockwaves through the other kingdoms. Most bent the knee, but 2 of the proudest houses, the Gardeners of the Reach and the Lannisters of the Westerlands, decided to unite their massive armies. They met Aegon on an open field, believing their overwhelming numbers would be enough. They had 60,000 men. Aegon had 3 dragons. This battle, which became known as the Field of Fire, was the first and last time Aegon, Rhaenys and Visenya fought together in a single battle. Valyrian, Varga and Meraxes took to the sky. They descended upon the massed ranks of the Reach and the Westerlands. Dragons do not fight like armies. They do not line up and exchange volleys. They are living weapons of mass destruction. The 3 dragons flew over the host again and again, breathing fire that turned men into ash, melted armor into the ground, and set the very grasslands ablaze. The air itself became a furnace. Horses burned in their barding, knights burned in their plate. 4,000 men died in that single horrible conflagration. The combined armies of the Reach and the Westerlands simply ceased to exist as a fighting force. King Loren Lannister and King Mern Gardener survived the initial onslaught, but they were utterly broken. Mern the Gardener was the last of his line. His entire family burned on the field. The Field of the Reach was razed. The Field of Fire proved that no army, no matter how vast, could stand against 3 dragons fighting as one. It was the single most decisive battle of the Conquest. As the ashes settled over the Reach, the news of the Field of Fire spread north faster than any raven. Torrhen Stark, the king in the north, had marched south with a formidable army of his own. He was a practical man, a hardened ruler of a hard land, but he was not a fool. He had heard of Harrenhal. He had heard of the Field of Fire. The north was vast and cold, but Dragonfire cares nothing for cold. The winters are harsh, but Dragonfire burns just as hot. He crossed the neck and looked south, knowing that his spears and swords were worthless against the monsters of the sky. He knew he had a choice. He could lose his army and his kingdom in a hopeless blaze of glory, or he could bend the knee and save his people. Torrhen Stark made the most difficult decision a king can make. He marched his army to the banks of the Trident, where Aegon waited, and there, with all of his bannermen looking on, he knelt. He took off his crown and laid it at Aegon's feet. Aegon respected the choice. He raised Torrhen up and confirmed him as the Warden of the North. From that day forward, Torrhen was known to history not as a coward, but as the king who knelt. It was not a surrender born of weakness. It was a sacrifice. He gave up his crown to protect his people from a war they could not win. The North submitted without a single battle. Blood was spared. With the Stormlands, the Reach, the Westerlands and the North all brought into the fold, only the power of Dorne remained truly unbowed. But for now, Aegon's new realm was taking shape. 3/4 of Westeros now belonged to House Targaryen. The foundation was laid. A new capital needed to be built, a new seat of power established, and the king's word needed to become law across a land that had been forged in fire. The lords of the 7 kingdoms had felt the heat of Valyrian's fire and bent the knee. But Aegon Targaryen was not simply a conqueror. He was a builder. He understood that a kingdom forged in fire needed a symbol, a seat of power that reminded every lord, every lady, and every king who came after him that their authority was born of conquest and maintained by strength. With the mainland submission complete, Aegon ordered the construction of the ultimate symbol of his authority. He commanded the swords of his defeated foes, gathered and brought to the capital. 1,000 enemy blades marked the end of the old order. Aegon summoned his dragon Valyrian, and the Black Dread opened his jaws over the pile. In the white-hot heat of Valyrian's breath, the swords did not melt into a smooth, comfortable throne. They warped, they twisted, they fused into a jagged, dangerous tangle of sharpened steel. The Iron Throne was never meant to be a seat of ease. It was a throne you could not slouch upon. A king who ruled unjustly risked being cut by his own crown. Aegon himself was said to have remarked that a king should never sit easy. The throne would stand as a constant warning for 300 years. With the throne forged, Aegon was crowned at Old Town. The faith of the 7 anointed him, legitimizing his rule in the eyes of the South. All the great houses accepted his authority. The Starks bent the knee, the Lannisters bent the knee, the Arryns, the Tullys, the Greyjoys, the Tyrells, the Baratheons, all of them, all save one, Dorne. The Dornish were different. They shared the blood of the Rhaenyra, a people who had defied the Valyrian Freehold itself thousands of years before. They had no intention of bending the knee to a Dragonlord now, and so began the First Dornish War. This was unlike anything the Targaryens had faced. The lords of the Reach and Westerlands had gathered armies in the open field, offering the dragons a single massive target. That was their doom. The Dornish were wiser. They refused the field. They knew a stone castle was just an invitation to burn. When the Targaryen host marched south, the Dornish melted into the deserts and mountains. They abandoned their castles. They left them empty for the dragons to torch, but they did not surrender. They struck instead at the baggage trains, the foraging parties, the stragglers. It was a brutal guerrilla war, a war of shadows and sand, designed to bleed the invaders dry without ever giving them the decisive battle they craved. Dragonfire could burn an army, but it could not find an enemy who refused to be found. It was in this grinding conflict that the greatest tragedy of Aegon's early reign unfolded. Queen Rhaenys, the most gentle and curious of the three siblings, was riding her dragon Meraxes over the castle called Hellholt. She was scouting, exploring. Perhaps she was simply enjoying the freedom of the skies. She flew too low. A Dornish archer, manning a scorpion bolt thrower, took aim and let fly. The bolt struck Meraxes directly in the eye. The great dragon crashed to the earth, taking her queen with her. The Dornish swarmed the wreckage. Rhaenys Targaryen, the Conqueror's queen, was dead. The dragon Meraxes was dead. The loss was catastrophic for the dynasty. Aegon had lost his wife and his sister in a single moment. Grief and rage consumed the court. Visenya, the elder sister wife, had always been the harsher of the two. Where Rhaenys had been charm and diplomacy, Visenya was fire and retribution. She and Aegon mounted their remaining dragons and unleashed a decade of relentless vengeance upon Dorne. Castle after castle was burned to ash. Every holdfast that had raised a hand against the queen was put to the torch. They called it the Dragon's Wrath. But the Dornish still refused the open field. They would not yield. The war became a grinding stalemate, a vicious cycle of burning and raiding that broke the land but never broke the spirit of the people. The land was scorched. Entire lordships were erased, but the Dornish flag still flew defiantly. In the end, the First Dornish War proved a harsh and enduring lesson for the Targaryen dynasty. Fire and blood could win battles, but they could not always win a kingdom. Dorne remained independent, a stubborn thorn in the side of the Iron Throne for nearly 200 years. The reign of the Conqueror continued, but the loss of Rhaenys had changed everything. The succession now rested on a single sickly son born to Aegon and Rhaenys, a boy named Aenys. The three-headed dragon had lost one of its heads. The unity that had forged the kingdom was broken. The hard work of holding a continent together would soon give way to the terrible struggle of keeping the dynasty itself from tearing itself apart. Aegon the Conqueror spent the final years of his reign ruling the kingdom he had united. But the realm was not as solid as the Iron Throne he sat upon. The scars of the First Dornish War never fully healed. The queen he had loved was dead, buried in a land that still refused to bend the knee. The dynasty was secure in its bloodline, but the world had changed. When Aegon died peacefully on Dragonstone in the year 37 after the Conquest, he left behind a kingdom, held together entirely by his will. The great question that hung over the succession was whether that will could be inherited, or whether it had died with the Conqueror. The crown passed to his eldest son by Queen Rhaenys, Aenys. Aenys was the first Targaryen king born in Westeros itself. He was named for the dreamer who had saved the house from the doom, and he carried his mother Rhaenys' gentle features and scholarly temperament. He was not a warrior. He was not a conqueror. He was an intelligent, thoughtful man who genuinely wanted to be a good king. But goodness in a ruler is often measured by the strength of their decisions, and Aenys struggled deeply with decision-making. He was indecisive by nature, constantly seeking the approval of his council, his lords, and the faith. He wanted to be loved, and that desire paralyzed him whenever a hard choice had to be made. The first test of his reign came almost immediately. The faith of the Seven had always tolerated the Targaryen practice of incestuous marriage because Aegon the Conqueror had been too powerful to oppose. His dragons had silenced every objection, but Aenys did not have that same aura of invincibility. The High Septon and the devout lords of the Reach watched the new king closely, looking for any sign that they could push back against the Valyrian customs they had always secretly resented. Aenys gave them their opening when he announced the marriage of his eldest son and heir, also named Aegon, to his sister Rhaenyra. This was the traditional way of the Dragonlords, the preservation of the pure bloodline that had allowed the Targaryens to bond with their dragons. But to the faith of the Seven, it was incest, plain and simple, and they would no longer remain silent. The High Septon refused to crown the young couple. He denounced the marriage from the Starry Sept in Old Town, and the call went out across the 7 kingdoms. The faith militant, the armed wing of the church that had been dormant for centuries, reawakened. The warriors' sons took up their blades. The poor fellows rose in their thousands, armed with whatever they could find. The faith did not simply object to the marriage. They demanded that the king renounce the tradition entirely, or face the righteous anger of the gods, made manifest through steel and faith. Aenys tried to negotiate. He travelled to Old Town personally. He offered compromises. He even issued a decree that outlawed the practice of incestuous marriage among the lords of the realm, hoping to carve out a special exception for the royal house. The faith rejected every offer. They did not want a compromise. They wanted the dynasty to submit to religious authority, and they believed they had the numbers to force that submission. Rebellion erupted across the Riverlands and the Reach. Lords who had bent the knee to Aegon saw the chaos as an opportunity to reclaim their independence. The king's authority crumbled faster than anyone had expected. Aenys was not a battlefield commander. He did not mount his dragon and burn the rebels into submission. He sent messengers. He wrote letters. He pleaded for loyalty, and he received no answer but the sound of swords being sharpened. As the realm slid into war, Aenys' health began to fail. The stress of his failures crushed him. He grew thin. He grew fearful. He made the decision to abandon King's Landing entirely, fleeing with his wife, Queen Alyssa Velaryon, his children, and his household to the safety of Dragonstone. It was a decision that effectively surrendered the capital to the chaos. The Iron Throne sat empty. The king was a fugitive in his own realm. On Dragonstone, isolated from the storm he had allowed to consume his kingdom, Aenys declined rapidly. He had never been built for the weight of the crown. He lived only a short time after his retreat, dying in the year 42 after the Conquest, just 5 years into his reign. He was 37 years old. He had tried to rule with gentleness and compromise in an age that demanded iron, and it had cost him everything. His death left a vacuum of power at Dragonstone. His son Aegon the Uncrowned was the rightful heir, young and untested in command. His mother Alyssa tried to hold the family together, but the realm was fractured. The faith was in open revolt. The lords were choosing sides, and watching from the shadows of that same fortress was Aenys' half-brother, the son of Visenya. He had been exiled once for his cruelties, but he had been allowed to return. He had watched his brother fail, and he had learned from every mistake that Aenys had made. He was not gentle, he was not indecisive, and he was not interested in waiting his turn. By the time Aenys I died, the realm was collapsing into chaos. The faith militant had risen in open rebellion. The pious lords of the Reach and the Riverlands were sharpening their swords, and the Iron Throne sat empty. Save for a crown that no one seemed strong enough to wear, Aenys had left behind children. He had left behind a son, Aegon, who history would remember as the Uncrowned, because he never truly got the chance to sit the throne. But Aenys also left behind a half-brother who had been passed over in the line of succession, a half-brother who had been exiled across the narrow sea for taking a second wife, a half-brother named Maegor. Maegor returned from Pentos with the black dragon Valyrian, the same beast that had carried Aegon the Conqueror to war. He did not come to negotiate. He came to claim what he believed was his. The realm looked at this man and saw a warrior, tall, broad, armoured in black steel, his face twisted by cruelty. But what made Maegor truly terrifying was not his size or his skill with a sword. It was his total lack of hesitation. He was not a king who could be challenged. He was a king who would simply kill anyone who tried. Aegon the Uncrowned did try. He rode his own dragon, Quicksilver, against Valyrian. It was a brave act, some might even say a noble one, but it was a fool's errand. Quicksilver was a young dragon, fast and sleek, but she was no match for the Black Dread. The battle lasted only moments. Valyrian tore through the sky and snapped Quicksilver in half, sending the young prince plummeting into the waters of the Blackwater Rush. Maegor had secured his throne in the only language his enemies truly understood: blood and fire. With the usurpation complete, Maegor turned his attention to the greatest threat to his rule, the Faith Militant. The warriors' sons and the poor fellows had already proven they could hound a Targaryen king to death. They had broken Aenys. They would not break Maegor. The king summoned the High Septon to the capital and demanded the Faith be disarmed. The High Septon refused. Maegor had him arrested and executed. Then the king raised a new army, not of men but of fire. The warriors' sons fortified themselves inside the Sept of Remembrance, a grand structure in the heart of King's Landing. They believed the gods would protect them. Maegor rode Valyrian directly into the city. He did not lay siege. He did not negotiate. He simply burned the Sept of Remembrance to ash. The marble melted. The statues of the Seven crumbled. The Faith Militant, the very force that had driven his brother to despair, was annihilated in the heat of dragonfire. Maegor did not just win the war, he erased the memory of their strength. But Maegor was not a king who knew how to stop making war. He needed a seat fit for a tyrant. Aegon the Conqueror had built the Aegon fort, a simple holdfast of wood and earth. Maegor despised it. He ordered it torn down, and in its place, he commanded the construction of a massive castle of pale red stone. A castle that would not just house the king, but protect him from a world he knew despised him. He called it the Red Keep. Within its walls, Maegor designed a labyrinth of secret passages, tunnels that ran behind the tapestries, stairwells that spiraled into darkness, hidden doors that opened into nothing. He wanted a fortress that held no secrets from him, a place where he could move unseen and unheard. The construction took years, and it took the labour of thousands of men. When it was finished, when every stone was laid and every tunnel was carved, Maegor made sure the castle would keep its secrets forever. He gathered every stonemason, every architect, every builder who had worked on the Red Keep, and he had every single one of them put to death. The knowledge of the secret passages died with them, buried in the throats of the men who built them. For 6 years the realm bled. Maegor was a master of war, but he was a failure at peace. He took 3 wives, executed any lord who looked at him sideways, and ruled from a throne of pure fear. But the throne, the Iron Throne itself, was a jealous beast. It had been forged from the swords of Aegon's enemies, and it seemed to hate the unworthy who sat upon it. Near the end of his reign, the throne itself cut Maegor, a wound that would not heal. Some say it was an executioner's blade that took him. Others say the throne simply rejected him. When Maegor died, found dead upon the Iron Throne with his wrists slit and his body covered in the throne's own jagged edges, no one wept. But the realm had a problem. Maegor had no true-born son who could follow him. He had cleared the path to the throne by slaughtering the sons of Aenys, but he had left the bloodline hanging by a thread. That thread was the last surviving son of Aenys I, a boy of 13 who had been hiding on Dragonstone, praying that his uncle's fury would not find him. His name was Jaehaerys, and he would inherit a kingdom in ashes, a treasury drained by war, and a dynasty hated by the very people it ruled. But Jaehaerys was not Maegor. He was something the realm had not seen since the Conqueror himself, a leader who understood that a crown could not rest on terror alone. Maegor the Cruel had crushed his enemies, but he had not won the peace. The realm he ruled was a husk, a kingdom of ash and silence, held together only by the shadow of Balerian's wings and the terror of the Iron Throne. The Faith Militant was scattered, its Sept of Remembrance a charred ruin. But the hatred that had caused the uprising still burned in the hearts of the small folk and the pious lords. Maegor sat in Aegon's fortress, a king with no true friends, only subjects who feared him. His closest allies began to slip away. Lord Rhaegar Baratheon, the very man who had helped him take the throne, declared for Maegor's nephew. The realm rose again. One by one his allies deserted him. His own Kingsguard failed him. His hand turned against him. The stories say the Red Keep fell silent, the ghosts of the family he had wronged haunting the empty halls. He had no heir. His body, broken by wounds that would never heal, gave out. He climbed the Iron Throne for the last time, and his companions found him dead at its base. his wrists mangled by the jagged steel. Some say the throne killed him, rejecting a king unworthy of Aegon's seat. Some say he took his own life. Others, that the grief and loss of blood from 100 tiny cuts simply finished a body that had given up. The mystery of Maegor's death is a fitting end for a king of such brutal contradictions. He had come to power through murder, and he left it through a silent, invisible death. The boy who inherited the Iron Throne was Jaehaerys, the son of the gentle Aenys. He was only 14 years old. The kingdom he inherited was broken and deeply divided. The faith was humiliated but vengeful. The High Lords, who had sworn for him against Maegor, were ambitious and wary. The treasury was empty. And yet this boy, widely regarded as the greatest king of the Targaryen dynasty, rose to meet the challenge. He was crowned in Old Town, at the Starry Sept, seeking the blessing of the very faith his uncle had burned. Jaehaerys was strong, intelligent, and fiercely determined to restore the realm to peace. But he was not alone. His sister wife, Alysanne, was the true partner of his reign. Together, they were a formidable alliance. Alysanne was charming, intelligent, and deeply concerned with the welfare of the small folk. She flew her dragon Silverwing across the land, visiting the great castles and the lowest villages. She was the one who convinced Jaehaerys to abolish the Lord's right to the First Night, a reform that made him immensely popular with the common people. Their greatest achievement was reconciling the crown with the faith. The doctrine of Targaryen incest was the central issue of Aenys' reign, the cause of Maegor's war. Jaehaerys did not try to conquer the faith. He negotiated. He presented the doctrine of exceptionalism to the High Septon. It was a simple, elegant argument. The Targaryens were not like other men. They were the blood of the dragon. Given their power by the gods of old Valyria, their customs were outside the laws of men. In exchange for this concession, the Targaryens would obey the faith in all other matters. The Iron Throne would protect the faith. The High Septon accepted. The Great Schism was healed. A generation of peace was bought with a drop of Valyrian pride. Their reign lasted 55 years. It was a golden age unlike anything Westeros had ever seen. They built the King's Road, a great stone road linking the wall to the capital. They reformed the laws, building a unified code for the entire continent. Alysanne herself flew her dragon, Silverwing, to the wall, the first queen to ever visit the Night's Watch. She heard their plights and convinced Jaehaerys to grant the Watch the gift, a vast stretch of land to support their order. This act of compassion cemented her legacy as the most beloved queen in the history of the realm. Jaehaerys and Alysanne sired 13 children. 9 of them lived to adulthood. From this single generation, the entire future of the Targaryen dynasty unfolds. Aemon, the perfect prince; Baelor, the brave warrior; Alyssa, the dragon rider; Maegor, who became a scepter; and the younger children, whose names appear in the lineages of the next century. Every Targaryen who follows is a descendant of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, knowing that the succession would tear the realm apart again. Jaehaerys called the Great Council of 101. Hundreds of lords gathered to decide who would follow him. The choice was between Rhaenys, the daughter of Prince Aemon, and Viserys, the son of Prince Baelor. The council chose the male line, choosing Viserys. Jaehaerys accepted their decision, and the succession was set. When Jaehaerys the Conciliator died, the realm wept. He was over 80 years old. He had given them peace. He had given them laws. He had given them a golden age. His body was cremated, as was the Targaryen custom, and the greatest king of the dynasty went to the pyre. The reign of Viserys I, blessed with so much, inherited the deep foundations Jaehaerys and Alysanne had built. The treasury was full, the court was magnificent, and the dragons filled the sky. It was a time of prosperity that many thought would never end. Viserys was a good man, a gentle king who wished only to preserve his father's peace. But a good king does not always mean a strong succession. And the seeds of discord had been planted long ago. Jaehaerys was only 14 years old when he sat the Iron Throne, a boy king who had inherited a kingdom stained by the blood of his uncle's brutal reign. The Lords of Westeros had seen the Targaryen dynasty nearly tear itself apart, and they were watching closely to see if this young king would follow the path of his father, Aenys the Gentle, or his uncle, Maegor the Cruel. What they got instead was something entirely unexpected. The reign of Jaehaerys and his queen, Alysanne, is often called the Golden Age of the Targaryen dynasty, and it is not difficult to see why. After the turmoil of Maegor the Cruel, the realm desperately needed a steady hand. They found it in the Conciliator. The first great work of Jaehaerys' reign was the establishment of a unified code of law. Before him, the justice a man received depended entirely on where he lived and which lord held power over him. Jaehaerys, working closely with his most trusted advisor, Septon Barth, compiled all the conflicting decrees, the ancient pacts, and the traditions of the first men and the Andals into a single, coherent system. They called it the King's Peace. It guaranteed certain basic rights, set standard punishments for crimes, and most importantly, made the crown the ultimate arbiter of justice. A man accused of murder in the north could now appeal his case all the way to the Iron Throne. This was more than just a legal reform. It was the true unification of the Seven Kingdoms into a single political entity. Replacing disparate regional laws with this unified legal system was the foundation upon which the peace of his reign was built. While Jaehaerys gave the realm its law, Alysanne gave it its soul. She was a reformer, a traveller, and a queen who genuinely loved the people she ruled. Her progress to the north was unprecedented. No queen had ever travelled so far from the comforts of the capital. She journeyed up the King's Road, stopping at every village, every castle, speaking with the small folk and the lords alike. When she finally reached the wall, she was deeply moved by the sacrifices of the Night's Watch. She saw the hardship in the faces of the Black Brothers, the sworn men who stood guard against the frozen wastes. In a gesture of profound generosity, she donated a vast sum of gold, known as the Queen's Gift, which allowed the Watch to rebuild its fortifications and purchase supplies for decades to come. Her journey did not end there. On the way back south, she and Jaehaerys stopped at a humble village overlooking a lake called the Milkwater. The people there were so enamored with their queen that they renamed their home in her honour. It became known as Queen's Crown, a name that still appears on maps of the north, a permanent echo of the love the people held for their good queen. To connect this vast kingdom, Jaehaerys built the King's Road. It was not a new idea, but Jaehaerys made it a concrete reality. He ordered it to be paved, bridged and widened. It ran from the wall in the north all the way to Storm's End in the south, with branches reaching Old Town and the western shores. The King's Road became the spine of the realm. Armies marched along it, merchants traded along it, and messengers travelled its length as a matter of course. It bound the Seven Kingdoms together, physically as well as politically, ensuring that the King's peace could reach every corner of Jaehaerys' domain, and that no region could truly isolate itself from the rest. Under Jaehaerys and Alysanne, the Targaryen dynasty reached its absolute peak. The king was loved, the realm was at peace, and the laws were just. For 55 years, the Iron Throne stood as a symbol of stability and fairness. Dragons grew fat and lazy in the Dragonpit, and the land flourished in a way it never had before. But all golden ages must eventually end. Jaehaerys outlived all but one of his 13 children. His heir was a grandson, a man who inherited the throne, but perhaps not the iron will to hold it together. The seeds of the next great struggle for the Iron Throne were sown in the very stability that Jaehaerys created. With the kingdom unified under a single code of laws, and the realm enjoying a peace it had never known, it seemed the reign of Jaehaerys, the first and good Queen Alysanne, might truly last forever, and in a very literal sense, they tried to ensure it would, through their bloodline. Jaehaerys and Alysanne had an extraordinary number of children, 13 in total, a staggering feat of dynastic ambition that would in time transform the simple royal family tree into a vast and tangled forest of Targaryen heirs. The firstborn was a son named Aegon. In the grand tradition of the Conqueror, But the little prince lived barely a year. Next came a daughter, Daenerys, who died of a fever at just 7 years old. These early losses seemed like cruel twists of fate, not omens of a pattern. A third child, another son named Aemon, survived to become a knight. As the eldest living son, he was named Prince of Dragonstone and the heir to the Iron Throne. Aemon was everything a king should be: brave, learned and beloved. He was the future. But the cracks began to show in the dynasty's foundation. Aemon was killed in the Myrish penal colony on the island of Tarth, struck by a crossbow bolt meant for someone else. He left behind a wife and a daughter named Rhaenys, and a sudden, massive hole in the succession. The old king turned to his second surviving son, Baelon. Baelon the Brave, a seasoned warrior, a master of laws, and the father of 2 boys named Viserys and Daemon. Baelon was a strong, capable heir, and the realm seemed stable again. But the 13 children faced a relentless tide of tragedy. Their daughter Daella was gentle and frightened of everything. She married a lord of the Vale, but died giving birth to her only child. Another daughter, Viserys, was beautiful and headstrong. She died in a riding accident at the age of 16, racing her horse through the streets of King's Landing. Alyssa, the spirited middle daughter, died of a fever 3 days after giving birth to a stillborn son. Magel, kind and devout, became a scepter and died of grayscale in the quiet of a mother house. Rhaenyra, the most rebellious of them all, defied the king and queen so utterly that she was sent across the narrow sea to the pleasure houses of Lys, never to return. 2 more sons, Gaemon and Valyrian, died in early childhood. The 13th and final child, a daughter, did not survive her first hours. Of the 13 children born to the old king and his good queen, barely a handful survived to see their parents old. With every loss, a little more light seemed to fade from the Red Keep. Alysanne never truly recovered, her heart broken by the relentless toll of so many funerals. She died a few years before her husband, worn down by grief. Jaehaerys himself began to withdraw from the affairs of the court, the golden age of his reign slowly dimming as he outlived nearly every child he had brought into the world. And then Baelon died. Just like that, the heir to the Iron Throne was gone. A burst belly took him in the prime of his life, the same year Alysanne passed. The realm was stunned. Who would be the king's heir now? This was the moment where the tragedy of the family became a crisis for the entire continent. The question of succession could no longer be ignored. The debate emerged over whether the crown could pass through a female line. Was it lawful or even acceptable that a woman should rule over the lords of Westeros? The 2 candidates were starkly defined. On one side stood Princess Rhaenys, the only child of the fallen Prince Aemon. She was married to Lord Corlys Velaryon, the wealthiest man in all the 7 kingdoms, and she herself had ridden a dragon. On the other side stood Prince Viserys, the eldest son of the fallen Prince Baelon. He was a man surrounded by powerful friends and supported by the traditional view that a man must sit the Iron Throne. To settle the matter, the old king summoned the Great Council of the year 101 after the Conquest. Hundreds of lords gathered at Harrenhal to cast their votes. It was the closest Westeros ever came to a true binding election. The lords chose Viserys. The precedent they set was devastatingly clear. The crown would not pass to a woman. More dangerously, it would not pass through a woman to her male descendants either. This ruling set aside Rhaenys and her entire line, handing the throne to her cousin Viserys. This decision is often seen as the moment the dynasty sowed the seeds of its own destruction. The Great Council of 101 did not solve the problem of female inheritance. It merely postponed it, storing up immense legal and political tension for a future generation. When the old king finally passed away at the age of 69, the crown passed to his grandson, Viserys I. Viserys inherited a full treasury, a peaceful kingdom, and a dragon pit full of magnificent dragons. But he also inherited a family tree full of unanswered questions. The line of the elder heir, Aemon, had been publicly set aside. The line of the younger son, Baelon, now sat the throne, and the ambitions of the lords who had backed Rhaenys did not simply disappear. Viserys' own reign began peacefully enough, but the precedent of the Great Council hung over everything when Viserys himself, left without a son, had to choose an heir from among his own children. The decisions he made would unravel the peace his grandfather built. The carefully buried questions of what it meant to inherit a dragon and a kingdom would claw their way back to the surface, plunging the realm into the terrible fire of a family war that would nearly destroy the Targaryens entirely. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. And so we arrive at the turning of a new century in Westeros. The year 101 after the Conquest. The old king, Jaehaerys I, the Conciliator, had ruled for more than 5 decades. He had brought an unprecedented peace and prosperity to the realm. A golden age that seemed as though it might never end. But the king was growing frail, and the fundamental question that had plagued every monarchy since the dawn of time was once again pressing upon the realm. Who would come after him? The Conciliator had outlived nearly all of his children. His eldest son, Prince Aemon, had perished in the year 92, leaving behind only a daughter, the Lady Rhaenys. His second son, Prince Baelor, had served the king faithfully as the hand of the king, and was groomed for the throne for years. But Baelor himself had died just a few months before the council was called. In the very year 101, with the death of Prince Baelor, Jaehaerys I was faced with an empty succession. The intricate family tree that he and his beloved Queen Alysanne had so carefully cultivated had been brutally and repeatedly pruned by fate. Who had the stronger claim? Should the crown pass through the eldest son, even if that line was represented only by a woman and her children? Or should it follow the male line, passing to the son of the second son? This question was too heavy for one aging king to bear alone. It threatened to split the 7 kingdoms apart before the old king was even cold in his tomb. And so Jaehaerys, in the last great act of his reign, summoned the lords of the realm to Harrenhal, and they came. The gathering of over 1,000 lords at Harrenhal to prevent a civil war over the succession was the largest assembly of its kind in the history of the 7 kingdoms. The burnt and twisted towers of Harren the Black's monstrous castle, a monument to the folly of pride and the power of dragonfire, served as the backdrop for this unprecedented council. The sheer scale of the gathering was staggering. Harrenhal, the largest castle in the entire realm, was the only place capable of housing so many noblemen and their retinues. The lords of the great houses came in person. Lord Stark from the north, Lord Arryn from the Vale, Lord Tully from the Riverlands, Lord Tyrell from the Reach, Lord Baratheon from the Stormlands, and Lord Lannister from the Westerlands. The camps outside the walls stretched for miles, a city of tents and banners, representing every corner of the realm. For weeks, the roads to Harrenhal were choked with travellers, and the air was thick with rumour and scheming. The Great Council convened in the vast main hall of the castle, a space so large it could hold an entire army. The sunlight filtered through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes and the anxious faces of the lords of Westeros. King Jaehaerys, too frail to travel comfortably from King's Landing, had sent his decrees from the Red Keep, but his presence was felt in every judgment. The actual proceedings were overseen by the hand of the king, the wise and humble Lord Septon Bath, and a council of maesters and lords paramount. 2 rival claims were formally presented for judgment. The first came from the line of Prince Aemon, the king's firstborn son. Aemon's only child was Rhaenys, a formidable woman who herself had married into the great seafaring house Valyrian. Her claim was presented on behalf of her young son, Laenor Velaryon. Laenor Velaryon was descended from Jaehaerys' eldest son's daughter, placing him in the direct female line from the king's firstborn. His father was Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, the wealthiest man in the 7 kingdoms, a legendary explorer who had sailed to the ends of the known world. Corlys's treasury was bottomless, and he argued his grandson's case with considerable passion and influence. The second claim came from the line of Prince Baelon, the king's second son. Baelon's sons were Prince Viserys and Prince Daemon. Viserys Targaryen, a calm and amiable man of 34 years, was descended from the king's second son, but he was an adult male of the royal house. He was a dragon rider, and he had the backing of the vast majority of the court. Viserys had served as the master of coin for years, and was seen as a steady, reliable hand who would continue the work of his grandfather. The arguments were long and intricate. Learned maesters and lordly petitioners debated the ancient laws of the First Men and the Andals, while Targaryen scholars spoke on the unique customs of Dragonstone and Valyria. The precedent of the Great Council of the year 92, which had set aside Princess Rhaenys in favour of her uncle Baelon, was brought back into sharp focus. The lords of the realm worried about the precedent of a child king, or of a king whose power might derive its legitimacy through a woman. They worried about the ambitions of the sea snake, a man whose wealth rivaled that of the Lannis, and whose pride was legendary. The lords of the Stormlands and the Reach largely sided with Viserys. The lords of the Narrow Sea and the great fleet of Driftmark sided with Aenar, but the sheer weight of numbers was never in doubt. After weeks of deliberation, the council concluded its business and the votes were cast. The decisive vote that established male preference primogeniture, crowning Viserys I and setting the stage for future conflict, was utterly lopsided. When the final tally was announced, Viserys had won by a landslide. Of the nearly 1,200 lords in attendance, only a handful, perhaps 20 or so, voted for young Laenor Velaryon. The overwhelming majority of the gathered nobility chose Viserys Targaryen to be the heir. They chose an adult male over a child. They chose a direct male line over a female line. They chose stability over uncertainty. The Great Council of 101 AC is often remembered as the wise and peaceful settlement that prevented an immediate war, and in that it was a success. The Lords of Westeros were given a voice, and they used it to unequivocally state that the Iron Throne would henceforth pass to the nearest male relative of the previous king, regardless of the claims of any female-born line. It was the establishment of male preference primogeniture in the most explicit terms possible. The crown was awarded to Viserys, and in doing so, the lords believed they had set a clear precedent for all time. Corlys Velaryon left Harrenhal in a cold fury, whispering to anyone who would listen that the lords of Westeros had made a terrible mistake. Princess Rhaenys, the queen who never was, returned to Driftmark in silence, her face unreadable. But in the depths of her heart she knew the precedent that had been set today was not a law of nature. A king could change it. A king could choose differently. And one day, that choice would tear the realm apart. Jaehaerys I died peacefully in his bed in the Red Keep just a few short months later, in the year 103 after the Conquest. His reign had lasted 55 years. His legacy was peace, law and unity. But the crown he passed to his grandson, Viserys, was already cracked, before the new king had even set it upon his brow. The coronation of Viserys I was a grand affair, a celebration of the continued peace and power of the Dragon dynasty. For now, Viserys I sat the Iron Throne. His reign began with the promise of peace, but the ghosts of the Great Council lingered. The ambitions of his younger brother Daemon, a brilliant and unpredictable warrior who dreamed of being king himself, were a constant source of tension. The bitterness of the Velaryons simmered beneath the surface of court life, and the legal quagmire left by the council's decision, which had rejected a daughter but accepted the principle of inheritance through a daughter's line, was a wound that would not heal. The years of Viserys I's reign were a calm before a terrible storm. He was a good man, a lover of history and great feasts, a man who sought harmony above all else. Early in his reign, he took a wife from one of the great houses of the Reach, the daughter of the Master of Coin, a woman of House Hightower named Alysanne. Together they had a son named Aegon, a daughter named Helaena, and another son named Aemond. The old king's family tree was growing new branches, branching in directions that the Conciliator never could have foreseen. And with every new birth, the question of succession, the question that the Great Council had failed to truly answer, grew heavier, pressing down on the neck of the realm like a hidden hand. The first seeds of future sorrow were not planted in the council chamber alone. They were also planted in the royal nursery, in the heart of a king who could not bear to choose, and in the mind of a daughter who knew she had been born to rule. The Great Council of 101 settled the succession on Prince Viserys Targaryen, the grandson of Jaehaerys the Conciliator, and his second son, Baelor. The lords of the Seven Kingdoms, gathered in the grassy fields of Harrenhal, had spoken. They chose an adult male heir over a child, Prince Viserys over the young Laenor Velaryon. Old King Jaehaerys died peacefully in his bed not long after, a quiet end to a long reign, and so Viserys of the line of Targaryen came at last into his inheritance, and the realm prepared for another kingship. If the reign of Jaehaerys was the summer of the dynasty, the reign of Viserys I might be called its golden afternoon. The kingdom was at peace, the treasury was full, and most vividly, the dragons had returned in astonishing numbers. There were dragons over the Red Keep, dragons over Dragonstone, dragons on Driftmark. Never before, and never again, would so many of these living fires exist in the known world at once. The Targaryen family, at that moment, possessed around 20 dragons. The biggest and oldest of them was still Vhagar, born in the days of Aegon the Conqueror, but the new generations gave the court a dizzying array of beasts. From the golden Syrax to the pale grey cloud of Sheepstealer, to the massive but gentle Vermithor, once the mount of King Jaehaerys himself. This was the absolute peak of Targaryen wealth and dragon numbers. It was an age of feasts, of tournaments, of splendid processions. The realm had never been richer, and the Dragonlords had never seemed more secure. But even in this golden age, a quiet flaw threatened the stability of the dynasty. Viserys had no living sons by his first wife Aemma Arryn. His only surviving child was a daughter, the Princess Rhaenyra. For years, the king held out hope for a male heir. But after a series of difficult pregnancies and infant deaths, the situation became painfully clear. Viserys loved his daughter fiercely, her fierce spirit and her dragon's heart. He saw her as his true successor. In defiance of centuries of tradition, which had seen the Iron Throne pass only from father to son, Viserys made a decisive move. He summoned the lords of the Seven Kingdoms to King's Landing, one by one, Lord Paramount and Landed Knight alike. Before the Iron Throne and before the gathered court, he commanded them to swear oaths of fealty to Rhaenyra as his rightful heir. The lords bent the knee, and Princess Rhaenyra was declared the future Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. For a time, the oath held the realm together, but the stability of the succession rested entirely on the king's will, and that will was soon bent by grief and by counsel. King Viserys took a second wife, the Lady Alysanne Hightower. She was the daughter of his hand, Sir Otto Hightower, a clever and ambitious man. She was young, beautiful, and devoted to the faith of the Seven. It was not long before the new queen gave the king what he had long desired from his first marriage: sons. Aegon, named after the conqueror, Aemond, Daeron. With the birth of these princes, a rival line was introduced to the court. Queen Alysanne, naturally protective of her children's claims, began to push back against the inheritance of Rhaenyra. The court slowly divided. The oath sworn to Rhaenyra by the lords was no longer a simple memory. It became a weapon, a grievance, a symbol of either duty or oppression, depending on which side of the Red Keep you stood. Viserys, growing older and increasingly sickly, seemed to withdraw into his models and his pain, trying to maintain peace by pretending the factional rift did not exist. He refused to alter the succession, but he also refused to discipline the queen or her faction for challenging it. He tried to keep both Rhaenyra and Alysanne close, but the gulf between them widened with every passing year until the court itself was split in two. Viserys I died in his sleep in the 129th year after Aegon's conquest. His body was found by his servants, his death mask, a peaceful mask of pain, eased away. He had worn the crown for over a quarter of a century. He had presided over the highest peak of dragon glory, but he had left a succession that depended entirely on the word of lords, who were now free to choose their own path. The great dragon pit of King's Landing housed beasts that would soon turn against their own riders. The green silk of the Queen's party and the black silk of the Princess's party were stitched, but the stitching held only by the King's own will. The moment that will was gone, the stitching began to tear. Iron was the throne, but fire and blood were the dragons. And the dragons, once bound to a single will, were about to be unleashed. The peace of King Viserys I's reign was a wonderful golden dream, but dreams are fleeting things. They fade the moment you open your eyes. And in the final years of Viserys' rule, the realm slowly began to awaken to a cold and bitter reality. The court of the Red Keep, once the seat of harmony and unity, had become a viper pit. The greatest threat to the Targaryen dynasty was no longer an external enemy. It was the family itself, fracturing into two distinct and hostile camps. On one side stood the Queen, Alicent Hightower. She was the daughter of Oldtown, a woman of deep faith and fierce maternal instinct. She believed her sons were the true heirs to the Iron Throne, and she would do everything in her power to see them claim it. She gathered her allies around her like a cloak of emerald silk. Her father, Otto, the former hand of the king, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Criston Cole, the Master of Whisperers, Larys Strong, who seemed to know every secret that passed through the halls. They called themselves the Greens, after the colour Alicent chose to wear at a great tournament, a subtle but potent symbol of her defiance against the black and red of the royal house. Rhaenyra watched from the shadow of Dragonstone. She was the realm's delight no longer. She had grown wary and hardened by the constant scheming. She saw her stepmother's ambitions for what they were, a direct assault on her birthright. She gathered her own faction. Her uncle, the rogue Prince Daemon Targaryen, the most dangerous man in the Seven Kingdoms, and the rider of the blood-red dragon Caraxes, the sea snake Corlys Velaryon, whose wealth was rivaled only by the crown, and his wife, the queen who never was, Rhaenys Targaryen, a woman of legendary wisdom and pride. They were the Blacks, the true Targaryens in their eyes, holding fast to the king's decree that Rhaenyra was his heir. The growing animosity was a slow poison. It seeped into every political calculation, every marriage proposal, every word spoken or left unspoken. The court became a game of shadows. Whispers replaced conversation. Trust became a weapon. The deaths of key figures only deepened the divide and further isolated Rhaenyra from the capital. Lord Lyonel Strong and his heir, Harwin Strong, died in a mysterious fire at their castle of Harrenhal. The fire was suspicious, but no one could prove who lit the match. Many suspected Daemon, others whispered of the Greens. For Rhaenyra, it was a devastating blow. Sir Harwin was rumoured to be the true father of her three eldest sons. He was her protector, her anchor in a hostile court. His death isolated her completely from the capital's power structures, forcing her to rely entirely on her faction at Dragonstone. Then came the death of her husband, Sir Lyonel Velaryon. The official story was that he died in a fight during a tourney or a brawl in the Stepstones, but the rumours that swirled around his death were thick and dark. Was he slain by Daemon to clear the way for a marriage with Rhaenyra? Did Corlys Velaryon sanction it to ensure the line of succession remained strong? The truth was buried, but the result was clear. Rhaenyra was now a widow, and her political isolation was nearly complete. And so, in a move that shocked the continent and sealed the fate of the kingdom, Rhaenyra married her uncle, Prince Daemon Targaryen. It was a union of fire and blood, a Valyrian wedding in the traditions of old, performed in secret by a priest from the Free Cities. It was scandalous, an uncle marrying his niece, but it was a match of immense political and dragon-bound power. Daemon brought his dragon caraxes, his military genius from the Stepstones, and his unyielding ambition to her cause. Rhaenyra brought the legitimacy of the king's choice, her own dragon Syrax, and the blood of the dynasty. The marriage consolidated the Drang power of the Blacks into a terrifying force. House Velaryon, though grieving, remained largely loyal to Rhaenyra through the connection of Laenor's memory and the blood of Rhaenys. Together, the Blacks controlled Dragonstone, Driftmark, and commanded the allegiance of the North, the Riverlands, and the Vale through their powerful lords. But the Greens were not idle. They had the capital, King's Landing. They had the treasury. They had the largest dragon in the world, the ancient she-dragon Vargar, long since claimed by Queen Alysanne's second son, Prince Aemond. And most importantly, they still had the king. As Viserys grew weaker, his body rotting from the years of ruling, the two factions prepared for the inevitable. The king himself tried desperately to mend the rift in his final days. He organised feasts, demanded oaths from his lords, and pleaded with his family to unite. He even carried himself through the throne room on a litter, a skeletal figure wrapped in gold, to affirm Rhaenyra's right. But his efforts were ultimately futile. The bitterness ran too deep. His daughter saw his weakness as submission to the Greens. His wife saw his love for Rhaenyra as a betrayal of their sons. The realm was now split in two, and every lord in Westeros was forced to choose. Every dragon was counted. Every alliance was tested. The great wheel of fate had turned. The dance of dragons was no longer a possibility waiting in the distant future. It was a certainty, waiting only for the fall of the king, who held the kingdom together with his last weakening breaths. And when he finally fell, there was no one left to stop the fire. The Red Keep in the year 129, after Aegon's conquest, was a castle holding its breath. King Viserys I was a shadow of the man who had once presided over the greatest peace the Elm had ever known. His body had been ravaged by decades of illness, his face reduced almost to a skull, a mask of raw bone and grief. The governance of the realm had long since been taken up by others, chiefly his wife Queen Alicent of House Hightower, and her father the Hand, Otto Hightower. Princess Rhaenyra, the named heir to the Iron Throne, had retreated to Dragonstone months earlier, feeling the cold walls of the Red Keep closing in around her. The court was a collection of whispers and factions, every lord and lady aware that the king's fragile hold on life was the only thread preventing the realm from unravelling. That thread finally snapped in the early hours of the morning. The king died quietly in his bed. It was not a scene of fanfare or tragedy, but a simple sad passing. An old, worn-out man finally let go of a life that had given him too much grief. The maester who attended him knew immediately what this meant. He sent for Queen Alicent. Before the sun had fully risen, Lord Larys Strong, the Master of Whisperers, called the Clubfoot, had sealed the tower. No ravens were to be sent. The gates of the Red Keep were quietly barred. The death of the king was a secret held by a very small, very determined circle of people. Queen Alicent convened the small council that very morning. The king's body was not laid out for viewing. The council was told their king was simply too ill to attend, and that his wishes were for them to act in the name of stability. The Hand, Sir Otto Hightower, laid the plan before them with cold precision. The realm could not be allowed to fall into chaos. Aegon, the king's eldest son, must be crowned immediately. It was a decision made in the space of a single meeting. The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Messengers were sent to the captains of the city watch. The High Septon was summoned. Aegon himself was found in his chambers, hungover and reluctant, but his mother and Sir Criston Cole convinced him of his duty. They presented the crown as a burden he must bear for the good of the realm. The coronation was held in the Dragonpit, the vast domed arena in the heart of King's Landing. The great bronze doors were thrown open, and the people of the city were called to witness. They had not been told their king was dead. They were simply told a new king was to be crowned. The crown of Aegon the Conqueror, a simple circlet of Valyrian steel set with rubies, was placed upon Aegon's head. Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, knelt and swore his sword to the new king. The crowd, packed into the vast space, roared its approval, or was made to seem as though it did. The powerful golden dragon Sunfire was brought forth, and he roared in answer, a sound that shook the very stones of the city. Aegon II was king of the Andals and the First Men, but the realm did not know. The lords of the great houses had not been consulted. The dying king's wishes had been set aside. The moment the coronation was done, ravens finally flew from the city, carrying the news of a new king and the death of the old one. The news reached the lords of Westeros as a shock, but the deed was done. The capital was held, the treasury was secured, and the great dragon had bent its neck to the new king. Across the Blackwater Bay, on Dragonstone, the news did not arrive by raven. It came by ship, brought by a loyal captain who had slipped past the blockade. Princess Rhaenyra was in her 7th month of pregnancy. The shock of her father's death and the audacity of her half-brother's betrayal struck her like a physical force. The stress threw her into a violent labour. The birth was a long and terrible ordeal. The child, a daughter she had intended to name Visenya, was born too early and stillborn, a tragedy that layered itself upon the larger tragedy of the kingdom. Rhaenyra herself was gripped by a childbed fever, hovering between life and death for days. Her husband, Prince Daemon, stood vigil at her bedside. Her household knights, her sworn protectors, prepared for war. When she finally rose from her sickbed, gaunt and furious, she was a different woman. The grief had burned away any hesitation she might have felt. She accepted the crown from her supporters in the great hall of Dragonstone. Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, stood with her. Prince Daemon placed the crown of her father upon her head. The crown was the simple circlet of Viserys, a crown of red gold and black diamonds. She was Rhaenyra Targaryen, the first of her name, Queen of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lady of the Seven Kingdoms, Protector of the realm. The war for the succession had begun. The realm now had 2 monarchs. The lines were drawn. The North, the Vale and the Riverlands largely kept their oaths to Rhaenyra. The Westerlands, the Stormlands and the Reach declared for Aegon. Brothers were set against brothers. Men who had been friends for decades found themselves commanding armies on opposite sides of a continent. The arguments over oaths and traditions and the rights of women and sons swirled through every castle and keep in the land. But the true power of House Targaryen was not in its oaths or its armies. It was in the dragons, and the dragons were now divided. The great black dragon Vargar, the largest living dragon in the world, was ridden by Prince Aemond of the Greens. The magnificent Syrax belonged to Queen Rhaenyra. Caraxes the Bloodworm was ridden by Prince Daemon. Sunfire was Aegon's. The dragons of the Targaryen family, once a symbol of their unity, were sorted into 2 opposing flights, their fires burning for different queens. This was the precipice. The quiet death of a single man had shattered the peace of a century. The succession crisis had finally erupted into open conflict. The stage was set for a war that would consume the heirs of the dragon, burn the land, and leave a scar on the dynasty that would never fully heal. The dance of the dragons was no longer a looming shadow, it was a fire-given breath. The realm now had 2 claimants, and the delicate balance of whispers and alliances could not hold much longer. Rhaenyra remained on Dragonstone, grieving her father and growing suspicious of the silence from the capital. When word finally arrived that Aegon II had been crowned in the Dragonpit before the masses, she knew the war had already begun. But she was not yet ready to march. She needed allies, and she needed them quickly, so she sent out her sons. Prince Jaehaerys flew north upon Vermax, bound for the Arryn Winterfell, to secure the loyalty of the Arryns and the Starks. And Prince Lucerys, the younger boy, just 14 years of age, mounted his young dragon Arrax and flew east along the coast to Storm's End to treat with Lord Boros Baratheon. It was a dangerous journey for a boy so young, but Lucerys carried his mother's words and the memory of the oaths sworn to her at the Great Council of 101. He hoped those oaths would hold. He hoped the name Targaryen still carried the weight it once had. The storm was already building over the narrow sea. As he approached the great drum tower of Storm's End, the wind howling against the ancient walls of the Durrandon fortress, he was led into the round hall, where the carved faces of the Storm Kings stared down from the pillars. Lord Boros sat in his high seat, surrounded by his 4 daughters. He was a man who prized strength and promises above the dusty words of old oaths, and standing beside him, already a guest of honour, was Prince Aemon Targaryen. The sight of his uncle sent a cold shiver through Viserys. Aemond was 19 now, a skilled swordsman, and the rider of Vargar, the largest and most fearsome living dragon in the world. He had beaten Viserys to Storm's End, and he had already won Lord Boros's allegiance with a betrothal to one of his daughters. Viserys presented his mother's letter, reminding Lord Boros of his sworn duty. But before the Lord could even read it, Aemon stepped forward. The old wound was still raw between them. A decade before, in a scuffle at Driftmark, Viserys had taken Aemon's eye with a blade. Aemon had never forgotten, and he had never forgiven. "Lord Boros," Aemon said, his voice steady and hard, "this boy and I have a private matter to settle. An eye for an eye. I would have the boy's eye as a payment for the one he stole from me." Viserys stood his ground. He refused the demand. Lord Boros looked between them, weighing his alliances, and he sided with the man who had brought Vargar to his doorstep. He gave Viserys nothing, not even a night's shelter. The boy was told to leave before the storm swallowed the sky entirely. Viserys fled the round hall. He mounted Arrax and took to the air, hoping to lose himself in the gathering clouds. But Aemond was not finished. He called for Vargar, and the ancient beast rose into the tempest. The chase above Shipbreaker Bay was a nightmare of rain and lightning. The 2 dragons were barely visible to each other in the darkness, but Vhagar was immense, and Aemond was relentless. Viserys tried to climb above the storm, hoping the clouds would hide him. For a moment it seemed to work. The wind grew quieter, the rain thinned, but Vhagar was an old hunter, and she knew the sky. Arrax, young and terrified, turned in the confusion and breathed a burst of flame at Vargar. It was a desperate act, a flash of fire in the dark. The flame caught Vhagar's face, and for the first time in decades, the great dragon felt pain from an opponent. It enraged her. She lunged forward with a speed that belied her age, and her jaws closed around the young Arrax in midair. The crack of bones and the shriek of the dying dragon were swallowed by the storm. Viserys fell into the churning black water below. He did not resurface. Shipbreaker Bay had earned its name once more. The boy was gone, and his dragon was torn apart by a beast 3 times its size. Aemond returned to Storm's End as the storm finally broke. He claimed the dragon had acted on its own, that the killing was an accident, but no one truly believed it. A prince of the realm, an envoy sent under a banner of truce, had been murdered in the sky. The war was no longer a possibility. It was now a blood debt. When the news reached Dragonstone, the grief was overwhelming. Rhaenyra collapsed when she heard the words. Her son, her little boy, was dead. But while the mother wept, the dragon prince acted. Daemon Targaryen did not mourn with soft words. He burned with a cold and calculating fury. He would not wait for armies to gather or councils to debate. He would strike where it would hurt the most. In the shadows of King's Landing, Daemon found 2 men who would become the most despised figures in the history of the Red Keep. Their names were Blood and Cheese. Blood was a former man of the City Watch, a brute who knew how to kill. Cheese was a rat catcher who knew every secret passage and hidden tunnel within the walls of Maegor's holdfast. Together they slipped into the castle on a quiet night, unseen and unheard. They made their way to the chambers of Queen Helaena, the sister wife of King Aegon II. Helaena was a gentle soul, a woman who found comfort in riddles and insects, utterly unsuited for the brutal world of court politics. She was asleep with her children. The twins, Jaehaerys and Jaehaerys, were 6 years old. The youngest, Maelor, was just 2. Blood and Cheese bound her and her maids before they could cry out. They held a blade to the queen's throat, and demanded payment for the death of Viserys, a son for a son. They forced Rhaenyra to choose which of her sons would die. In her terror, she named the younger boy Maegor, perhaps hoping the killers would be merciful to a child so small. But they were not merciful. They took Prince Jaehaerys, the heir to the Iron Throne, and they killed him in front of his mother. They cut his throat and left the body in the bed. The news shattered the Red Keep. The murder of a child beneath the king's own roof was a horror that transcended politics. The realm looked upon the act and knew that the Dance of the Dragons was no longer a struggle for the throne. It was a cycle of vengeance, blood feud that could never be forgiven. The Greens had killed first. The Blacks had answered in kind. Aemon Targaryen had taken a life in the storm, and Daemon had taken a life in the dark. The two sides were now bound together by shared grief and unyielding hatred. The old rules of chivalry and honour were abandoned. The war had become something far more terrible. A conflict that would not end until one house was utterly destroyed, or the dragons themselves were gone from the world. The sky had tasted blood, and the earth had too. The War of the Dragons had truly begun. The murder of Prince Viserys Velaryon and his young dragon Arax, devoured by Vagar over the stormy waters of Shipbreaker Bay, was not just an act of war. It was a fire that ignited a continent. The Dance of the Dragons had truly begun, and the realm would bleed for it. King Aegon II and Queen Rhaenyra, half-siblings, now stood as irreconcilable enemies. The oaths sworn years ago at Harrenhal seemed like ancient history. Blood called for blood. It took the Blacks over a year of brutal warfare to bring the war to King's Landing. Battles at Rook's Rest, the Gullet, and countless skirmishes across the Riverlands led the Greens dry. But by the end of the year, 130 years after Aegon's conquest, the capital was ripe for the taking. Aegon II was crippled and broken from his wounds. Prince Aemond was waging a war of fire and blood in the Riverlands. The city was ripe. Rhaenyra's armies, led by the Turncloak Lord Larys Strong and the Gold Cloaks of the City Watch, opened the gates without a fight. Rhaenyra Targaryen entered the Red Keep and sat upon the Iron Throne. But her triumph was hollow. The treasury was empty. To pay for her war, she imposed crushing new taxes upon the small folk of King's Landing. She executed suspected Green loyalists. The common people, who had once loved her mother Queen Aemma and had cheered her as a princess, now looked upon her with fear and resentment. Food grew scarce. The winter winds blew in harshly. The people starved. Rhaenyra, growing paranoid, sat isolated in the Red Keep. The people began to whisper. They had called her father Viserys, the first a good king. They called her something else entirely. They called her King Maegor with teats. It was a cruel name, evoking Maegor the Cruel, the son of Aegon the Conqueror. The name was designed to strip Rhaenyra of her femininity and her legitimacy, portraying her as a monstrous tyrant. The tension in the city was a bow drawn too tight, and in this starving, terrified city, a fanatic rose to prominence. He was called the Shepherd, a man of the faith, driven mad by the horrors of the war. He stood in the streets and preached that the dragons were demons, that the war of brother against sister was a curse from the gods for the sins of the Targaryens. The desperate, the hungry, the angry, they listened. The entire city was a powder keg, and the shepherd was whispering scripture over a long fuse. The spark that finally lit the fuse came from the Dragonpit itself. Rhaenyra's youngest son, Prince Joffrey, a boy of only 11, decided to try and fly his young dragon Tyraxes from the Dragonpit. The people, seeing the dragon emerge, panicked. The riot began. The mob swarmed the great domed hill of Rhaenys. They went not just to protest, they went to kill. The first dragon to die was Joffrey's Tyraxes, killed in its lair by the mob. Joffrey himself was killed trying to mount his mother's dragon Syrax to save his own. Syrax, riderless and terrified, took flight over the city. Inside the darkness of the dragon pit, the slaughter continued. 3 other dragons were kept within: Morgul, the dragon of Rhaenyra's youngest son Jaehaerys; Shrykos, the dragon of her daughter Jaehaerys; and Dreamfire, the great dragon of Queen Helena, a creature of immense size and power, the mother of many clutches of eggs. The mob, wild with religious frenzy, tore them apart. Dreamfire sensed the danger and snapped her chains, her fury momentarily scattering the attackers. But she could not escape the sheer weight of flesh and stone that fell upon her. The dragon pit collapsed in sections, burying dragons and killers alike. The fifth was Syrax, the great yellow she-dragon, queen of dragons, had been circling the city. She descended upon the chaos at the dragon pit. The mob swarmed her. Without a rider, she was just a massive beast, confused and striking out. But she was weighed down by thousands of bodies. They climbed her, they stabbed her, they tore her apart. Syrax fell, and the cheers of the mob echoed through King's Landing. 5 dragons in a single night of fire and blood were gone. The military supremacy of House Targaryen, the very power that had held the 7 kingdoms together for almost 3 centuries, was broken, not by a rival house, not by a foreign conqueror, but by the starving, desperate people of the capital city, rising up against their dragon queen. The world had changed. Rhaenyra, hearing the news from within the Red Keep, the roar of the mob shaking the very stones, knew the game was up. Her power had evaporated in a night. The dynasty was crippled. The war was not over, but its character had irrevocably changed. There would be no more great aerial battles of dragon against dragon. The civil war would now be fought on the ground, by armies of men, in the mud and the rain. It would end not with the roar of a beast, but with the cold bite of steel and the bitter hollow taste of ashes. The crown, bankrupt and bloodied, would pass to a child, a boy who had seen his entire world consumed by the fire his family had so carelessly stoked for generations. The hour of the wolf is an old northern expression for the deepest, darkest stretch of the night, just before the first light of dawn. For the 7 kingdoms, that hour had finally arrived. Rhaenyra Targaryen, the realm's delight, the queen who had briefly occupied the Iron Throne, was now a fugitive in her own domain. The dragon pit lay in ruins behind her. Her army was shattered, her supporters scattering. With a heavy heart, she gathered her remaining children, the young princes Aegon and Viserys, and set sail for her birthplace, the ancient island fortress of Dragonstone. She must have hoped that the black stone walls of her childhood home would protect her. She was wrong. Aegon II had anticipated her retreat. With the help of the Master of Whisperers, Larys Strong, he had seized the castle. The garrison that had once sworn loyalty to Rhaenyra had bent the knee to the Green King. The moment her ship touched the dock, she was captured. They stripped her of her crown, her cloak, and her dignity. They forced her son, the boy Aegon, to watch. His mother was led into the courtyard, where the dragon Sunfire lay wounded but alive. The dragon did not burn her. It did not give her a quick death. It devoured her, consuming the queen alive as her son looked on, too terrified to scream. Rhaenyra Targaryen died at the age of 32, not on a throne, but as a meal for a dragon. The boy did not weep. He simply watched. And in that moment, something inside him broke forever. Her death was over. The war was not. Aegon II was a hollow victor. His body was broken from his own battles. His dragon was crippled. His treasury was empty. He ruled for a mere half a year before his own followers, desperate for a more stable hand, poisoned his food. He died in his bed, a mewling, ruined king. The throne of Aegon the Conqueror now passed to a boy of 10, a boy so traumatized he barely spoke. He was crowned Aegon III in the great sept of Baelor, but the realm was still teetering on the brink of chaos. The lords who had poisoned Aegon II walked free. They tried to claim the regency for themselves. They believed the south was theirs to divide. They had not counted on the north. Cregan Stark had sworn his sword to Rhaenyra. He was loyal to the memory of the Blacks. He arrived in King's Landing with a host of Northmen, men of winter and snow, who were utterly alien to the scheming lords of the capital. They expected a bribe. They expected a compromise. Cregan Stark gave them a trial. He appointed himself Hand of the King for a single day. This day became known as the Hour of the Wolf. He sat in the seat of judgment, and he did not blink. He executed the men who had poisoned the king. He executed the men who had broken their sacred oaths. He brought a cold, implacable justice to the Red Keep, and when his duty was done, he simply left. He did not seek power. He did not seek gold. He resigned the handship, secured the regency on terms favourable to the crown, and marched his men back to the frozen north, leaving the realm in the hands of a regency council. The realm finally had a king, Aegon III, the Dragonbane. He was a sullen, quiet king. He never smiled. He hated the colour red. He hated the sight of fire. He had inherited a kingdom without wealth, without friends, and without a single living dragon capable of serving a rider. The great dragons of history were gone. Varga, Vermithor, Silverwing, Sunfire, Caraxes, Syrax, all dead. The few dragons that remained were stunted creatures born in the aftermath, small and sickly. The last true dragon would die under his watch, twisted and misshapen in its egg. The Targaryen dynasty forever severed from its Valyrian heritage. The Dance of the Dragons had not merely ended a succession crisis. It had ended an age. It had stripped the house of the dragon of its greatest power. The Targaryens were now just a royal family. They were no longer Dragonlords. The long, sad twilight of their dynasty had begun. The previous chapter ended with the quiet, grim aftermath of the Dance of the Dragons. Cregan Stark had dispensed his justice. The poisoners of Aegon II had been executed, and the realm was left to a boy king who had witnessed the very worst of what fire and blood could do. Aegon III was a king shaped entirely by trauma. His deep-seated hatred of dragons was the central fact of his psychology. It was not a political position. When he was 10 years old, he watched his mother, Rhaenyra Targaryen, be fed alive to the dragon Sunfire. He saw the flames. He heard her screams. From that day, he could not stand the sight of the creatures that had torn his world apart. He refused to enter the Dragonpit. He flinched whenever the topic of dragons was raised. He was, in a very real sense, a king whose kingdom had been broken by the very symbol of his dynasty's power, and yet fate refused to let the dragons simply vanish. One last dragon was born during his reign. It was a stunted, sickly creature. It had weak wings and a pale, sputtering flame. It never grew to the size of the great beasts of old. It lived for only a short time, and when it died, it left behind a clutch of eggs. Those eggs never hatched. They hardened into stone, grey and lifeless. The world of men had seen its last living dragon. In the years that followed, Aegon III became obsessed with reversing this loss. He brought alchemists and priests and sorcerers to King's Landing. They placed the stone eggs in great braziers. They performed arcane rituals. They poured gold and blood upon them in every combination imaginable. The eggs remained cold. The attempts failed every single time. It was the clearest sign imaginable that the age of dragons was over. The dynasty had lost its ultimate weapon, and no amount of magic or alchemy could bring it back. They were just rulers now, mortal men sitting on a throne made of swords. The crown passed from Aegon III to his sons, and the realm entered a quieter century. The Targaryens had to learn to survive without their dragons, a truth that would define the reigns of every king who followed. From this point forward, the family tree would grow not in the shadow of dragon wings, but entirely on the strength of the people who bore the name. The first to test this new reality was Daeron I, the eldest son of Aegon III, who ascended the throne at the tender age of 14. He was a boy of grand ambitions, determined to prove that the dragon's blood still ran hot, even if the beasts themselves were gone. He looked south, to the one land that had successfully resisted Aegon the Conqueror himself, Dorne, when his councillors warned him that they no longer had dragons to melt the Dornish castles. The young king famously replied that he had a dragon, and that it stood before them. Daeron proved to be a military genius, launching a brilliant three-pronged invasion that did what his ancestors could not. Within a few years, the Prince of Dorne bent the knee, and the young dragon wrote a famous book celebrating his triumph. But it was a fragile victory. The Dornish rose in rebellion, using guerrilla tactics that the ironclad knights of the crown could not match. Daeron was lured into a trap under a banner of peace and slain at the age of 18. His brief, bloody dream of conquest cost the realm 50,000 lives, proving that without dragons, holding territory through brute force alone was a deadly, unsustainable game. The crown then passed to his younger brother, Baelor I, a man of a completely different nature. Where Daeron sought glory in blood, Baelor sought it in prayer. He began his reign by walking barefoot down the Boneway to Dorne, carrying his brother's hostage cousins back to their homes as a gesture of peace and reconciliation. Baelor was a Septon king, deeply pious and increasingly unhinged. He built the great sept of King's Landing, fasted for weeks at a time, and locked his 3 sisters away in the Maidenville to prevent them from tempting the court with carnal desires. To Baelor, the loss of the dragons was not a tragedy, but a divine cleansing. He believed the Targaryens had been humbled by the Seven so they could rule through faith rather than fear. When he eventually starved himself to death during an extreme fast, the realm breathed a quiet sigh of relief, turning to his uncle, Viserys II. Viserys had served as hand of the king for both of his nephews, quietly holding the 7 kingdoms together while they chased holy visions and military glory. Though he ruled as king for only a single year before his death, his administrative genius kept the realm stable during its most vulnerable transition. But the peace he secured would not survive his successor, his eldest son, Aegon IV, remembered by history as Aegon the Unworthy. Aegon IV was the dark mirror of his ancestor, Aegon the Conqueror. Where the first Aegon had united a continent, the fourth Aegon threatened to tear it apart through sheer self-indulgence. He was corrupt, gluttonous, and obsessed with his own pleasures. He gave away royal treasures to sycophants and fathered bastards with dozens of women. On his deathbed, bloated and dying of a horrific rot, Aegon IV committed his final, most destructive act. He legitimized all of his bastard children, both highborn and low. In doing so, he placed his noble bastard son, Daemon Blackfyre, a warrior who bore the ancestral Targaryen sword, in direct competition with his true-born heir, Daeron II. This single act of malice or madness set the stage for the Blackfyre rebellions, a series of civil wars that would divide the realm for generations. The Targaryens no longer fought with dragons, but they had learned to fight each other with political alliances, whispers, and steel. The era of fire and blood had transformed into an era of politics and betrayal, where the crown was held not by the terror of a beast, but by the fragile loyalty of lords. Aegon III, the Dragonbane, ruled for 26 long years, a quiet king, haunted by the memory of his mother's death and the last dragon's final breath. The realm he left behind was scarred but stable, a kingdom learning to exist without dragons. When he died in the 157th year after Aegon's conquest, the crown passed to his eldest son, a boy of 14, Daeron, and the stillness of Aegon's reign was immediately replaced by fire. Daeron I was a stark contrast to his father. Where Aegon had been drawn inward, Daeron was outward, charismatic, brilliant, and burning with an ambition that the realm had not seen since the days of the Conqueror himself. He looked at the map of Westeros and saw one unfinished task: Dorne, the one kingdom that had never truly bent the knee. Aegon the Conqueror and his sisterwives unite the continent, but Dorne had remained defiant. Daeron saw this as his destiny. He would complete what Aegon had started. The traditional gates into Dorne were the mountain passes, the Boneway in the east, the Prince's Pass in the west. Every army that had attempted to force those passes had found them to be death traps. The Dornish knew the terrain. They bled armies dry in the narrow ravines. Daeron discarded all the old plans. He would not march into the mountains. He took his entire army by sea. This is what made the campaign brilliant. Daeron assembled a colossal fleet, the largest seen in the narrow sea since the days of Aegon. He loaded tens of thousands of men onto ships and sailed around the entire southern coast of the continent. The Dornish lords had fortified the passes. They had prepared for a war from the north. Daeron landed his army on their beaches in their undefended rear. It was a complete strategic surprise. Sunspear fell. The Shadow City was taken. The Dornish lords, caught off guard and without their traditional defences, submitted. Daeron was 18 years old. He had conquered Dorne. He returned to King's Landing in triumph, the youngest king in history to achieve such a victory. He wrote a book about it. He called it the Conquest of Dorne. That a submission won by force of arms is not a true peace. The moment Daeron sailed back north, leaving a garrison, the Dornish began to resist. They rose in rebellion. Daeron returned 2 years later to crush them. He defeated them again in open battle, and again the Dornish lords pretended to yield. They sent word that they wished to swear fealty. Under the sacred protection of a peace banner, Daeron rode to meet them. It was a trap. The Dornish lords had never intended to make peace. When Daeron and his principal knights were vulnerable, the Dornish gave a secret signal. The peace banner was a lie. They fell upon the young dragon and cut him down. He was 18 years old. His body was stripped of his armour and paraded through the streets of Sunspear. The death of Daeron sent a shockwave through the Seven Kingdoms. Tens of thousands of soldiers had been lost in the Dornish wars. The crown passed to his brother, Baelor. Baelor was a man of faith, not of war. He walked into Dorne barefoot and unarmed, and he made peace where his brother had made war. He brought the bones of the young dragon home. The Targaryen dynasty, bloodied and exhausted, turned towards a new era, an era of faith and reconciliation, under the shadow of a kingdom still healing from its wounds. Baelor I, who would be remembered by history as the Blessed, was a king unlike any who had come before. He did not seek vengeance for his brother's murder. Instead, he walked barefoot into Dorne to forge a lasting peace, even rescuing his cousin, Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight, from a cage suspended over a pit of venomous vipers. Legend says Baelor was bitten dozens of times, yet survived through what many believe to be sheer divine intervention. Back in King's Landing, his piety grew to extreme lengths. To protect his own mind and the kingdom from carnal temptation, he locked his 3 sisters away in a secure section of the Red Keep that became known as the Maidenville. He emptied the royal treasury to feed the poor and began the construction of a massive domed sept on Visenya's hill, a monument to the Seven that would bear his name for centuries. But his devotion was his undoing. Baelor fasted constantly, seeking to cleanse his soul of earthly sins. In the 171st year after the conquest, his self-starvation finally claimed his life, leaving no direct heirs. The crown then fell to his uncle, Viserys II. Viserys had served faithfully as Hand of the King for decades, keeping the realm running smoothly while his nephews chased glory in dawn and visions in the heavens. Though he was a brilliant administrator who enacted many wise laws, his reign lasted only a single year before he succumbed to a sudden illness, leaving some to whisper that his own son had hastened his end. That son was Aegon IV, remembered by history as the unworthy. Aegon's reign was a dark mirror to the piety of Baelor and the duty of Viserys. He was a man of insatiable appetites, corrupting the court, handing out royal favours to his many mistresses, and draining the treasury to satisfy his whims. He fathered countless bastards across the realm. On his deathbed, in an act of ultimate malice or madness, Aegon legitimised all of his natural-born children. With a single stroke of his pen, he sowed the seeds of division and set the stage for generations of bloody civil war, as the legitimate heirs and the legitimised bastards began a deadly dance for the Iron Throne. When Daeron the young dragon fell in Dorne, cut down by a bolt of Dornish steel in a shattered hall of skulls, the realm was left with a strange and heavy choice. Daeron had no sons. His heir was his younger brother, a prince named Baelor, but Baelor refused the crown. He said he was unworthy of it, that his true calling was to the faith of the Seven, not to the Iron Throne. He was a deeply pious man, a prayerful man who wore a hair shirt beneath his princely robes. He had to be practically dragged to the throne, convinced by the High Septon and his uncle Viserys that this was his duty. Eventually, he accepted the burden of kingship but he never stopped seeing himself as a Septon first. He was a king who knelt before his gods. Baelor I's reign was unlike anything the Targaryens had ever seen. He was utterly consumed by the faith. Every decision he made, every law he signed, was filtered through long hours of prayer and penance. The war in Dorne, the brutal, grinding conflict that had claimed his brother, Daeron, weighed heavily on his soul. He saw the bloodshed, the betrayal at the banquet, the tens of thousands of dead, and he believed it was a sin, an affront to the gods. He resolved to end it, not with steel and fire, but with something far more uncomfortable for a dragon king. He resolved to end it with humility. In the year 161, after Conquest, Baelor made a peace with Dorne that would hold for generations. But he did not do it through envoys or formal letters. He did it with his own 2 feet. He walked. He made the entire journey from King's Landing to Sunspear barefoot. The distance is hundreds of leagues. Through the mountains of the Stormlands, across the rivers of the Reach, over the burning stones of the Boneway. His feet bled. He wore a simple robe of undyed wool, carrying a crystal of the faith. He refused food. He lived on the charity of strangers. When he arrived before the gates of Sunspear, the Dornish did not know what to make of this strange dragon. He did not demand fealty. He did not threaten fire. He fell to his knees before the Prince of Dorne and begged for forgiveness. Forgiveness for the sins of his house, for the burning of the Dornish hosts, for the cruelty of the war. It was an act of profound, almost foolish humility. The Dornish were deeply suspicious of his motives, but they were also deeply impressed by his conviction. A lasting peace was signed. The Prince of Dorne even sent his own son and heir to King's Landing to be fostered. A gesture of trust that sealed the agreement. Baelor returned to the capital, a living saint. The small folk called him blessed. The High Septon called him a gift from heaven. To honour this faith, to give a permanent home to the power of the Seven in the life of the realm, Baelor undertook a project larger than any Targaryen had attempted. On Visenya's hill, where Aegon the Conqueror's original wooden sept had once stood, he ordered the construction of a great cathedral, the Great Sept of Baelor. It was designed to be the largest building in the city, a soaring structure of white marble brought from the mountains of the Vale, crystal windows from Maya, a great golden dome that could be seen from the river. It was the home of the High Septon, but it was also Baelor's obsession. The cost was monstrous. It took nearly a generation to complete and almost bankrupted the royal treasury. But Baelor did not care for coin. He cared only for the glory of the gods. He spent hours there every day, praying for the souls of his people. His piety, however, took a much darker, more intimate turn when it came to his own family. Baelor was deeply troubled by the presence of women. He was a man of intense faith, and he saw beauty as a trap, a temptation of the flesh that could lead a man to sin. He had 3 sisters, Daenys, Rhaenyra and Alysanne, all beautiful. To him, they were distractions from his holy purpose. So he did what he felt a best king must do. He locked them away. He confined them to a tower in the Red Keep, a structure which became known as the Maidenville. They were prisoners there for the entire decade of his reign, forbidden from seeing the sun, forbidden from having suitors, forbidden from marriage. They lived in luxury, but in total isolation. It was a cruelty born of sincere and twisted faith. Daenys, the eldest, known as Daenys the Defiant, eventually escaped the Maidenvault long enough to conceive a son, a child who would one day shatter the dynasty with a rebellion. But in that moment, the realm saw only the king's sanctity, not his cruelty. Baelor's faith eventually consumed him entirely. In the year 171 after Conquest, a great summer drought had gripped the 7 kingdoms. The crops were failing. The people were starving. Baelor believed he could save them. He believed his faith could move the gods to send rain. He began a strict fast. He refused food. He refused drink. The High Septon begged him to stop. His uncle Viserys, the hand of the king, the man who truly ran the realm, pleaded with him, telling him the realm needed a king, not a martyr. Baelor was convinced he was doing the work of the gods. and he would not be swayed. After a full moon's turn of total fasting, his body gave out. Baelor the Blessed died in the great sept he had built, surrounded by the Silent Sisters. He was only 21 years old, with no sons, and with his sisters locked away in the Maidenville. A succession crisis loomed, but Baelor, in his final lucid moments, had already settled it. He passed over his sisters entirely, declaring them unfit to rule. The crown was given to his uncle, Viserys II. Viserys was the complete antithesis of his nephew. He was not a brilliant warrior like Daeron. He was not a mad monk like Baelor. He was the realm's greatest accountant, a quiet, calculating politician who had effectively ruled the Seven Kingdoms as Hand of the King for 3 decades. He had held the realm together while his nephews rode off to war and prayer. He had rebuilt the treasury. He was the architect of the peace. Now at an advanced age, grey and tired, he finally took the crown for himself. Viserys II's reign was brief. He ruled for only a single year and a single day, but his short reign was a masterclass in steady governance. He restored the treasury that Baelor had emptied on the Great Sept. He reformed the currency. He stabilized the court after the chaos of Baelor's erratic rule. His death in 172 passed the crown to his own son, a prince who had waited his entire life for the throne, and in waiting had grown fat, lazy and bitter, a man of considerable charm, immense appetites, and very great flaws. Aegon IV. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. Baelor the Blessed passed from this world in a haze of self-inflicted starvation. His reign an anomaly of piety that left the realm intact but financially drained. The crown passed not to a child, but to a man who had long served as the realm's steady hand. Viserys II of his name, who had quietly governed as Hand of the King under both Daeron the Young Dragon and the devout Baelor. Viserys II reigned for only a single year, yet his tenure stands as a model of efficient governance. He was a man of immense skill, having effectively run the Seven Kingdoms for decades. He restored the treasury, reformed the currency, and strengthened the crown's authority without seeking glory for himself. He was exactly the king the realm needed, a firm and capable ruler following the exhausting extremes of the warrior and the monk. But fate, as it so often did in this family, offered only a glimpse of stability. In the autumn of 171 after the Conquest, Viserys died suddenly, some say of a chill, others whispering of poison. The throne passed to his son, and that son was Aegon, the 4th of his name. He is remembered by history as Aegon the Unworthy, a monarch whose reign stands as a systematic dismantling of everything his father had built. Where Viserys had been disciplined and prudent, Aegon was gluttonous, vain, and utterly without principle. He surrounded himself not with capable counsellors, but with flatterers and sycophants who fed his ego and indulged his whims. He sold high offices to the highest bidder, debased the coinage to fund his extravagance, and granted vast tracts of crown land to his favourites, stripping the royal demesne of its strength. The court of King's Landing became a place of debauchery, known more for its feasts and intrigues than for its justice. Aegon was a man of prodigious appetites, and he indulged them freely. He took many noble women as his mistresses, often discarding them when he grew bored. He granted favours for the sake of a night's pleasure, elevating unworthy men to high council positions, while deserving lords were ignored. His systematic debasement of the court was not accidental. It was the deliberate policy of a king who preferred to rule through chaos, keeping his vassals weak and divided by setting them against one another. Aegon fathered a host bastards, but the realm would come to know 8 of them. In particular, the ones history calls the Great Bastards. There was Daemon Waters, born to his cousin Rhaenyra Targaryen, the fairest maiden in the realm, whom he had locked away in the Maidenville. There was Aegor Rivers, born to Barbara Bracken, a fierce and angry boy who would grow into a hardened warrior known as Bittersteel. There was Brynden Rivers, born to Melissa Blackwood, a boy marked from birth by an albino appearance and a strange gift of foresight, who would become known as Bloodraven. And there was Shira Seastar, daughter of Serene of Lys, a woman of legendary beauty and mystery. These four, and a handful of others, would shape the destiny of the dynasty for generations. But the king's most significant relationship was with his true-born son, Daeron, the Prince of Dragonstone. Daeron was thoughtful, scholarly, and devout. He favoured peace and diplomacy, and he befriended the Dornish, a people his father loathed. Aegon grew to despise his heir. He spread vile rumours, whispering that Daeron was not his son at all, but the product of an affair between his own queen, Rhaenys, and their brother, Aemon the Dragonite. He compared Daeron unfavourably to his bastard son, Daemon, a natural athlete and warrior, handsome and charismatic. To further his spite, he gave Daemon the Targaryen ancestral sword, Blackfire, the blade of Aegon the Conqueror, a weapon that had traditionally passed from king to heir. In that single gesture, he armed his bastard with the very symbol of royal legitimacy. And then, on his deathbed, Aegon the Unworthy committed his most chaotic and consequential act. Surrounded by his lovers and his sycophants, consumed by hatred for his lawful son, and perhaps by guilt over his own wasted life, he put his seal to a decree. He officially acknowledged and legitimised all of his bastard children, every single one. With a stroke of a quill, he transformed his bastards into rivals for the throne. He gave them the name of the house, the blood of the dragon, stripped only of the legal stain of their birth. As the king took his last ragged breath, the realm held its own. The crown passed to Daeron II, a prince of peace and learning, but the seeds of a terrible bloodletting had been planted. The sword Blackfire was in the hands of Daemon. The bastards were legitimised. The great bastards, each a gifted and dangerous figure in their own right, what now stood as a challenge to the stability of the throne. Some swore loyalty to Daeron. Others looked to their half-brother, Daemon, who bore the conqueror's sword. The ground trembled beneath the feet of the new king, for the dynastic struggle, known as the Blackfire Rebellions, was already gathering. A conflict born from the spite of a dying man who had loved nothing but his own appetites. King Aegon IV died in the year 184 after the Conquest, leaving behind a realm poisoned by his own corruption and a succession crisis he had deliberately inflamed with his dying breath. In his final act, he had legitimised all of his acknowledged bastards, the group history remembers as the Great Bastards. The eldest and most prominent of these was Daemon Waters, but the throne passed not to a bastard, but to Aegon's legitimate son by his sister Rhaenys, a prince named Daeron. The accession of the scholarly Daeron II was a quiet, almost academic affair, a stark contrast to the bluster of his father's court. Daeron was a king cut from a very different cloth. Where Aegon IV was gluttonous, cruel, and indulgent, Daeron was bookish, diplomatic, and deeply devoted to the faith of the Seven. He surrounded himself with maesters and scholars, seeking to bring order and wisdom back to the realm, which struck many of the traditionalist lords as signs of weakness. Worse still for the new king, there was a persistent whisper, a rumour that began in the shadows of the throne room and soon echoed in every tavern and holdfast in the realm. It was said that Daeron was not truly Aegon IV's son at all. The whispers claimed his mother Rhaenys had loved her other brother, the legendary knight Aemon the Dragonite, and that Daeron was the fruit of that pure love, not the union with a king she despised. Whether this was a truth of the heart or a malicious fiction designed to undo a king, this doubt was a splinter driven deep under the crown from the very moment it was placed upon his head. The supporters of his bastard half-brother seized upon it eagerly, questioning the king's legitimacy and their own oaths of fealty. That half-brother was Daemon Waters, and he was the living embodiment of everything the rebellious lords wanted in a king. Daemon's rise was almost inevitable, given the temper of the times. He was tall and powerfully built, with the silver-gold hair and deep purple eyes of the ancient Dragonlords of Valyria. He was a brilliant commander on the battlefield, the kind of man who inspired songs simply by drawing his sword, and in his hands he held a weapon that meant more than any crown or title. He possessed ancestral Valyrian steel sword of House Targaryen, the very blade of Aegon the Conqueror, Blackfire. Aegon the Unworthy had gifted the sword to Daemon when the boy was just 7 years old, a gesture of favouritism that would weigh far more heavily on the realm than the king ever intended. To the lords of the Seven Kingdoms, Blackfire was a symbol of divine right. It was the sword of conquest. Where the sword went, they reasoned. So went the rightful king. Daemon took the sword and the black dragon on a field of fire as his sigil, earning his bastard name into a royal title. He was no longer Daemon Waters. He was Daemon Blackfire, and the realm gathered to his banner, lords who chafed under a peaceable king, who longed for the glory of war, and who saw in Daemon the true face of a conqueror. The tensions between the dragon and the black dragon could not hold forever. Open war erupted across the kingdoms in the year 196 after the Conquest. The first Blackfire rebellion saw half the realm arrayed against the other, brother fighting brother, cousin against cousin. The rebel host, led by Daemon Blackfire and his twin sons, Aegon and Aemon, met the royalist forces of King Daeron II on the vast open grasslands known as the Red Grass Field. It was a battle of terrible consequence, the bloodiest single day of warfare since the Dance of the Dragons. Daemon's charge was a thing of legend, the black dragon banner flying high as his men cut through the royal vanguard. For a moment, it seemed the rebellion would triumph, but King Daeron had his own champions. Chief among them, his half-brother Brynden Rivers, the sorcerer and master of whispers known as Bloodraven. From a distant weirwood tree at the edge of the field, Bloodraven loosed a shaft from his longbow of weirwood and dragonbone. The arrow flew true, piercing the great bastard through the throat. Daemon Blackfire fell dead in the mud of the red grass field. His twin sons, trying to reach their father's body, were cut down moments later. The rebellion was crushed that day, its body broken on the field, its spirit scattered to the wind. But the Targaryen family tree was permanently fractured. The surviving Blackfires and their supporters fled across the narrow sea to the free cities, where they festered in exile for generations, launching rebellion after rebellion. The dragon's line had split, and a wound of mistrust had been opened in the dynasty that would never truly heal. In the long peace that followed the red grass field, when the blood had dried and the bodies had been burned, King Daeron II worked tirelessly to mend the realm he had fought to keep. He brought Dorne fully into the fold through treaty and marriage, a feat of diplomacy his warrior ancestors had never managed with the sword. He built roads, fostered trade with the free cities, and strengthened the royal treasury. He kept the peace for nearly 20 years, but the shadow of the Blackfire question remained. The sword Blackfire was lost, taken by the exiles, but the claim to the throne was not. The seeds of strife had been planted deep in the soil of the kingdom, and they would continue to sprout through the reigns of his sons and grandsons. The dynasty had survived the first great test of its legitimacy, but the price of survival was a hidden fracture deep within the great family tree, a flaw the passing years would never quite erase. When Daeron II Targaryen put down the first Blackfire rebellion, the realm believed the worst was over. Daemon Blackfire was dead, his golden company scattered. But the death of a rebellion is rarely the death of a cause. Daeron had won the war, but he had not won the peace. He ruled with mercy and wisdom, but the scars of the red grass field ran deep, and among the scars left by that battle was a man who would come to embody the ruthlessness the crown required to survive. Brynden Rivers was a son of King Aegon IV, born of his mistress Melissa Blackwood. He was one of the great bastards, a man of immense talent and profound ambition. But unlike Daemon Blackfire, who embodied the warrior ideal, Brynden was a creature of whispers and shadows. He was an albino with skin like milk and hair like white silk and a port wine birthmark that splashed across his cheek like a splash of blood. He had been mocked as a boy for his appearance, but he never forgot a slight, and he never forgave an enemy. At the Redgrass Field, he commanded the royal archers and lost an eye to Daemon Blackfyre himself. From that day, his enemies called him Bloodraven. They whispered that his weirwood bow drank deeply that day, and that his aim was guided by powers older than the Seven Kingdoms. When Daeron the Good died in the Great Spring Sickness of the year 209, the crown passed to his son Aerys. King Aerys I was a scholar, a bookish man who had no taste for the games of court. He gave his seal to Brynden Rivers, his uncle, making him Hand of the King, and from that moment, the Seven Kingdoms were ruled not from the throne, but from a gnarled weirwood seat in a dark tower, where a one-eyed sorcerer king recorded every secret. The Great Spring Sickness had emptied the city of its leaders. Daeron was dead. His hand was dead. The heir to the throne had perished in a trial by combat at Ashford Meadow. The realm had been decapitated, and then the rains stopped. The drought that followed the sickness was a second plague. The rivers shrank, the crops failed, the small folk starved. In the villages of the Reach and the Riverlands, desperation turned to anger, and in the free cities, the sons of Daemon Blackfyre saw their chance. Aegon Blackfyre, the eldest of Daemon's surviving sons, had spent his entire life in exile, training for war. He crossed the narrow sea with a host of sellswords and dispossessed lords, expecting the starving lords of Westeros to rise for him. But Aegon did not understand the nature of his enemy. Bloodraven had been preparing for this moment for years. His whisperers had infested every port, every market, every lord's household. He knew the strength of Aegon's army before it even set sail. He knew which lords were wavering, and he knew that if Aegon could not be met in open battle, he could be struck down in the dark. The Second Blackfyre Rebellion was over almost before it began. The royal forces fell upon the invaders at a place called the Wendwater, and the Blackfyre army was shattered. Aegon himself was captured. The manner of his death is a matter of infamy. Bloodraven offered a full pardon and safe conduct to every rebel who laid down their arms. Aegon knelt and surrendered his sword, trusting in the honour of the crown, and Bloodraven had him cut down where he knelt. It was a cold-blooded murder, a stain that would never wash clean from Bloodraven's name, but it sent a clear message. The crown would not tolerate rebellion, and it would not keep faith with traitors. The Third Blackfyre Rebellion erupted a few years later, led by Daemon III, another son of Aegon. He was younger, more reckless, but no luckier. Once again, Bloodraven's network of spies gave the crown every advantage. The rebellion was crushed at sea before the Pretender could even land his army in Westeros. Daemon III was killed in the fighting, and the Blackfyre claim seemed to die with him. Bloodraven's grip on the realm tightened. He consulted the flames and dreamed of dragons. Some whispered he was a sorcerer, a man in league with powers no mortal should touch. He certainly did nothing to deny it. The peace he imposed was the peace of the grave. There were no new rebellions, but the realm rotted beneath his gaze. Lords who had opposed him were attainted, executed, or sent to the wall. The drought continued, and the Hand did little to ease the suffering of the common people. He cared only for the security of the dynasty. He sat on his weirwood throne, a pale figure with one red eye, listening to the whispers of 1,000 informants, while the kingdom withered around him. When King Aerys I died without issue, his brother Maegor took the throne. Maegor was a warrior, a man who valued honour and strength. He despised Bloodraven's methods, his reliance on spies and assassins. For a time, Bloodraven remained in power, but his influence was waning. When Maegor died in a pointless siege, the crown passed to his son Aegon V, a king who had been raised among the common folk. Aegon the Unlikely had seen the fear Bloodraven inspired with his own eyes. He had travelled the realm in disguise, and he knew how deeply the Hand of the King was loathed. One of his first acts as king was to arrest the old spymaster and sentence him to death. The sentence was commuted. Bloodraven was not executed, He was stripped of his lands and titles and exiled to the Wall, to take the Black and vanish forever into the northern waste. He went without protest, an old man with one eye, a pale skeleton wrapped in a black cloak. He disappeared beyond the Wall, and the realm assumed he had died in the haunted forest, eaten by a shadow or frozen to death. But the story of Brynden Rivers was not over. 1,000 years of secrets were locked in that skull, and the old gods had not forgotten him. With the hand gone, the court of King Aegon V turned to new ambitions. The Blackfire threat had been purged, the spy network dismantled. Aegon was a reformer who wished to restore the rights of the small folk and curb the power of the great lords. But he was also a Targaryen, and he felt the loss of the dragons more keenly than most of his predecessors. He believed that the dynasty could not survive without its ancient power, that fire and blood were the only true foundations of the throne. He turned his scholars loose on the oldest records, searching for a way to hatch a clutch of petrified dragon eggs. He studied the scrolls brought from Valyria, the prophecies of Daenys the Dreamer, the rituals of old, and in the summer of 259, he gathered his family at the summer palace of Summerhall, seeking to birth a new age of dragons through fire and blood. The conflagration that followed consumed the palace, the king, and his eldest son, leaving nothing but ashes and a single cracked egg that would not hatch for another generation. After the chaos of the Blackfire rebellions and the harsh years of the Great Spring Sickness, Westeros was a land deeply scarred. The iron hand of Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers, had held the realm together through espionage and ruthless justice. But the drought and the plague had weighed heavily on the common people. A great council was called to decide the succession, and the lords passed over the direct male line to settle on a younger son. But the man they chose was not the one they expected to lead, and he would never govern the way they demanded. When King Maegor I died, the succession fell to a son no one had ever truly considered as a future king. Aegon V was called the Unlikely for good reason. He was the fourth son of a fourth son. During his youth, his father had sent him away to squire for a hedge knight named Sir Duncan the Tall. The boy who would become king travelled the roads of Westeros as Egg, a simple shaven-headed boy in common clothes. He slept in the open, ate in crowded inns, and saw the realm not from the Iron Throne, but from the dirt of the farmer's field. He listened to the grievances of the small folk, the knights of the roads, the sections of poor villages. He knew the weight a peasant bore when a lord demanded too much. This knowledge shaped everything he did when the crown was placed upon his head. When he took the throne, Aegon V did not forget the lessons of the road. He enacted a series of radical reforms designed to protect the common people. He issued decrees limiting the power of lords to demand excessive labour service from their tenants. He restricted the rights of lords to hold summary judgeships without royal oversight. He tried to bring the king's justice closer to the poorest corners of the realm. For the small folk, he was a saviour on the Iron Throne, a king who remembered their names. For the High Lords, this was an unforgivable encroachment. They saw a king meddling in the ancient sacred compact between the nobility and the throne. They saw a king who was, in their eyes, far too fond of the common herd. The love of the small folk was a real and powerful force, but it was the resentment of the great houses that would cripple his ability to govern and isolate his house. Aegon V tried to strengthen his political position on the backs of his children's marriages. He arranged betrothals for his sons and his daughter to the great houses, a Baratheon at Storm's End, a Tully at Riverrun, a red wine of the Arbor. But his children had their own ideas and their own hearts. His eldest son, Duncan, the Prince of Dragonflies, broke his betrothal to marry a mysterious woman of no birth named Jenny of Oldstones. His second son, the future King Jaehaerys, fell in love with his own sister, Rhaenyra, and married her in secret against every law of gods and men. His third son, Daeron, proved a drunkard who brought shame to the name. The brilliant political web Aegon had tried to weave collapsed entirely. His children's defiance left the crown isolated, unable to rely on the alliances he had so carefully planned with the very lords who already resented his rule. The king who had earned the love of the street had lost the loyalty of his own house. In the end, Aegon V's deepest yearning was for something only the ancient Targaryens could command. He wanted dragons. He believed perhaps that only fire-made flesh could truly enforce his peace and his reforms. He was an old man haunted by the fragility of his power. He gathered his family at the Palace of Summerhall to attempt the impossible, to hatch dragon eggs using wildfire and ritual. The tragedy that followed consumed the palace in a terrifying inferno. Aegon V, the unlikely king who had walked the roads of Westeros as a humble squire, perished in the flames alongside the Lord Commander of his Kingsguard, Sir Duncan the Tall. Summerhall broke the dynasty's heart and broke its pride. From those very ashes, a new heir was born, Rhaegar Targaryen, the Prince of Dragonstone. The reign that followed belonged to Aerys II, a king who inherited not the hope of the unlikely, but its bitter, burning ash. King Aegon V, the unlikely, looked out over a kingdom that would no longer listen to him. He had spent his life working for the small folk, trying to curb the ancient powers of the nobility, protecting the common people from the worst abuses of feudal law. He had issued decrees limiting the power of the High Lords. He had chartered new towns to give peasants a place free from the Lord's grasp, and the Lords of Westeros had simply refused to obey his commands. They knew the king was a reformer at heart, a man who had once been a squire to a hedge knight, and they did not respect him. Aegon V realized his crown was empty, without the power to enforce his will. He believed that if he could hatch a dragon, everything would change. He became obsessed. He studied the ancient scrolls of Valyria, brought pyromancers and maesters to the Red Keep, and spent the royal treasury searching for the secret of waking the stone dragon eggs. The king believed that with a dragon, he could fly over the great keeps of the realm and force the lords to accept his humanitarian reforms. The obsession consumed his reign. The treasury drained, the court grew restless, but the king would not be swayed. He withdrew into his experiments, dreaming of a world he could build with dragonfire. In the summer of 259 years after the Conquest, the king called his entire family together. The gathering was at the Summer Palace of Summerhall, a sprawling estate of white stone and coloured glass set in the green hills of the Stormlands. The occasion was a celebration. The king's grandson, Prince Aerys, and his sister wife, Princess Rhaenyra, were expecting their first child. The birth of a new prince would secure the Targaryen succession for another generation. A great tournament was held beneath the summer sun. Knights from across the realm came to compete. The royal family was reunited. King Aegon was there with his queen, Betha Blackwood. Their eldest son, Prince Duncan the Small, was there with his wife, Jenny of Oldstones, and her mysterious friend, the Ghost of High Heart. Their second son, Prince Jaehaerys, was there with his sister wife, Shira, and the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, the towering Sir Duncan the Tall. The man who had been the king's closest friend and mentor since childhood stood guard over them all. The mood was one of great hope, but the hope of Summerhall turned to ash in a single night. As the queen began her labour, a terrible fire erupted deep inside the palace. The cause remains one of the great mysteries of Westerosi history. Some say it was a kitchen fire that grew out of control. Others say the king's experiments with dragon eggs and wildfire finally sparked a cataclysm. Whatever the truth, the fire spread with impossible speed, turning the summer palace into a roaring furnace. King Aegon V, the unlikely, the king who wanted to reform the realm, perished in the flames. Prince Duncan the Small, the heir to the Iron Throne, died trying to save his family, and Sir Duncan the Tall, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, the He'Aich, who rose to become the greatest warrior of his age, died as well, trying to pull the stones and timbers from the path of the Inferno. It was the greatest single tragedy to strike the Targaryen dynasty Since the Dance of the Dragons, a century and a half earlier, three of the most powerful Targaryens, the king, his heir, and his protector, were gone in a single catastrophe. But from the ashes of Summerhall, a single spark of life was found. In the smoking ruins of the royal chambers, just as the dawn broke, Princess Rhaenyra had given birth. Her son had survived the fire. The boy was found crying in the morning light, covered in ash and soot, with a streak of blood across his face. He was named Rhaegar. The tragedy of Summerhall was over, but a new prophecy had been reborn. Rhaegar Targaryen had been born amidst salt and smoke. Far away at the wall, the king's brother Maester Aemon heard the news of the death and the birth. Aemon, a bookish man who had studied the ancient prophecies of his house, began to believe that the boy was the prince that was promised. Rhaegar himself grew up marked by the tragedy, a melancholic and brilliant child who dedicated his life to prophecy and destiny. He would later become convinced that the Song of Ice and Fire was written for him. The kingdom passed to Aegon's second son, Jaehaerys II. He ruled for only 3 short years before a wasting sickness took him, leaving the crown to his son, Aerys II. King Aerys II, the Mad King, inherited a wounded dynasty. He was haunted by the fire at Summerhall, paranoid of the lords who surrounded him, and increasingly jealous of his own son Rhaegar. The reforms of Aegon the Unlikely were dead. The prophecy of Rhaegar was growing, and the realm of Westeros, scarred by the tragedy of a king who wanted to bring back dragons, drifted toward a war that would shatter the Targaryen dynasty forever. The fire at Summerhall had claimed a king and a prince. It had shattered the dreams of a generation. Standing in the shadow of that terrible loss was a man who had never expected to wear the crown. Jaehaerys II, the second son of Aegon V, was now the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, and he was dying. Jaehaerys II was not a robust man. He had always been frail, more comfortable with books and prophecies than with swords and tournaments. His lungs were weak, and a persistent cough followed him. Everywhere he went, a constant reminder of his mortality. The maesters whispered that he would not last long. They were right. His entire reign spanned barely 3 years, but in that short, painful span, he would be forced to fight the last war of an ancient rebellion, and he would make a decision that would seal the fate of his dynasty forever. Across the narrow sea, a shadow had been growing. A rogues' gallery of mercenary captains, exiled lords and pirates had formed a pact called the Band of Nine. They were a collection of 9 ambitious men who planned to carve up the world, and their primary target was Westeros. Leading them was a figure who seemed ripped from a darker age, Maelys Blackfyre, known as Maelys the Monstrous. He was the last male descendant of the Blackfyre line, a line that had plagued the Targaryens for 5 generations. Maelys was huge, brutally strong, and behind his back, men whispered he had a second head fused to his shoulder, the face of a stillborn twin. He was a frightening symbol of the family's desperate end. The Band of Nine seized the Stepstones, the jagged islands between Dorne and Essos. It was a direct challenge to the Iron Throne. If the Stepstones fell, the way was open for an invasion of the entire continent. This was the final Blackfyre threat, the last time the sword of the Pretender would be raised against the dragon. King Jaehaerys II could not ignore it. He called his banners. This was the first truly united military campaign of the entire Seven Kingdoms in almost a century. The lords who answered formed a remarkable alliance. Tywin Lannister, just 20 years old, served under the king's banner, learning the cold calculus of command. Lord Ormond Baratheon led the vanguard, and his son Steffon fought beside him. A young lord of Winterfell named Rickard Stark marched south with the northern swords, the cold steel of his house reflecting a southern sun. Jon Arryn of the Eyrie was there, a man of honour and duty, and there was a boy from the Stormlands named Barristan Selmy, yet to be called a legend, who was about to earn his fame on that blood-soaked shore. The climax of the war was the Battle of the Stepstones. Lord Ormond Baratheon was slain in the chaos of the fighting, but in the very heart of that chaos Sir Barristan Selmy faced Myalis the Monstrous in single combat. In a moment of pure steel and valour, he struck down the last Blackfyre pretender. The Blackfyre Rebellion, which had started with Daemon Blackfyre years ago, was finally, truly over. The male line was extinguished forever on those jagged rocks. The sword Blackfyre itself was lost to the sea, claimed by the waters, as the last male heir was claimed by the grave. For Jaehaerys II, the war was a victory, but he was a man running out of time. His sickness was winning. He had no time for conventional wisdom. He had to act on what he believed was most important. Jaehaerys was deeply read in the old prophecies of the house. The prophecy of the prince that was promised consumed him. He believed that the hero who would save the world from a coming darkness was to be born from his own line. From the purest blood of the dragon, he had 2 children. His son Aerys was a young man of 20. He was charming, handsome, but already showing signs of a fiery and unstable temper. His daughter Rhaenyra was 19. In the tradition of old Valyria, marriages between brother and sister were allowed, but they had not been forced for generations. Jaehaerys, driven by the urgency of his prophecy and his failing health, decided he could not leave it to chance. He personally ordered Aerys and Rhaenyra to marry. He forced them. It was a tragic decision. Aerys and Rhaenyra had no love for each other in the way a husband and wife should. The match was made for the sake of a prophecy to keep the blood of the dragon pure. Jaehaerys believed that the prince that was promised would come from this union. The wedding took place in the middle of 262 AC. Jaehaerys II did not live to see the end of the year. He died at the age of 32, his brief reign over. The crown passed to Aerys II, the king, who would one day be called the Mad King. The forced marriage of Aerys and Rhaenyra was a seed of deep unhappiness planted at the very heart of the dynasty. The early years of Aerys' reign were bright, a period of prosperity known as the spring that never was, a gentle summer that lasted for years. The lords who had fought together in the Stepstones returned home as friends. Steffon Baratheon, Rickard Stark, Jon Arryn, Tywin Lannister, they had bled together. Old wounds between the regions had begun to heal, but the court of King's Landing was not a happy place. Aerys and Rhaenyra endured a tragic string of miscarriages, stillbirths, and infants who died in the cradle. The weight of the prophecy hung over them. Jaehaerys had staked the entire future of the dynasty on this one match, and for years it seemed to produce only grief. Finally, after years of heartbreak, a child was born who lived, a boy with the silver hair of old Valyria and a somber, thoughtful gaze. They named him Rhaegar. The name carried the weight of the dynasty's hopes. It also carried the weight of the prophecy that had forced his very existence. The Iron Throne had a new heir. The realm had a new future, but the cracks in the foundation of that future were already beginning to show. Jaehaerys II died in the year 262 AC, the candle of his life guttering out after a reign of barely 3 years. He was only 35. The crown, heavy with the memory of Summerhall and the old wars, settled upon the head of his son, Aerys, the second of his name. In his youth, Aerys was radiant. He had his father's sharp wit and his mother's silver gold hair, and he was praised for his learning and his genuine passion for the arts. The realm sighed with relief. The madness of the Targaryens, they believed, had skipped a generation. Aerys chose as his hand of the king his boyhood friend, the young lord of Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister. Tywin was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. He was the Hammer Aerys, needed to shape the realm into a peaceful kingdom. Together, they restored the crown's authority, broke the power of rebellious lords, and filled the royal treasury with gold. These were the promising early years of Aerys II, supported by his brilliant and ambitious hand. But the shadow of Tywin's competence was long. Where the realm saw Tywin's success, the king eventually saw only his own failure, and the seeds of envy began to take root in his heart. In the year of the Great Comet, 277 AC, a petty lord named Daenys Darklyn of Duskendale defied the king's authority. Such insolence could not be tolerated. Aerys, still confident in his kingship, rode to Duskendale to personally teach the rebellious lord a lesson. He walked straight into a trap. Lord Darklyn seized the king and his entire retinue, locked them in the dungeons of the Dun Fort, and held them for ransom. For 6 terrible months, Aerys sat in a dark cell, powerless, friendless, utterly alone. He was not tortured with steel, but with fear itself. Every creak of the door was an assassin in his mind. Every whisper from the guards was a plot against his life. The crown he had worn with such pride meant nothing inside that black cell. When Ser Barristan Selmy and the full forces of Tywin Lannister finally stormed the town and freed him, the king who emerged was a hollow husk. The defiance of Duskendale had shattered his fragile sanity beyond any hope of repair. Aerys came home a completely different man. His first act as a free king was to brood in the Red Keep. His second was to turn on everyone he once trusted. He could no longer look at his old friends, for they had witnessed his utter humiliation. He saw Tywin not as a saviour, but as a rival who had proven the king's impotence before the whole realm. Aerys became obsessed with fire. He found comfort only in the company of the pyromancers, who offered him the sweet green poison of wildfire. He commanded them to make more and more, stockpiling immense caches of the substance throughout the capital, hidden beneath the streets, under the Sept of Baelor, and deep beneath the Red Keep itself. He called it a weapon against his enemies, but it was really a monument to his fear. And then there was his son. Prince Rhaegar grew into everything Aerys was not. He was beloved by the common people, a brilliant warrior on the tournament field, and a quiet scholar who read deeply of prophecy. This was not a comfort to the king, it was a sentence of death. Aerys grew deeply suspicious of his own son and heir. He saw Rhaegar not as a prince in waiting, but as a traitor plotting to steal his throne. He refused to let Rhaegar near the levers of power, and he took every opportunity to humiliate and isolate him. The rift between the Mad King and his heir became a chasm of mutual suspicion and bitter silence. At the great tournament at Harrenhal, this chasm opened for all the realm to see. Aerys attended the grand event, but he was a spectre at the feast, mistrusting everyone, muttering darkly to himself. When Rhaegar crowned Lyanna Stark as the Queen of Love and Beauty instead of his own wife, Prince Rhaegar's silent defiance was displayed before the eyes of the entire kingdom. Aerys grew intensely suspicious of the Starks, the Baratheons, and the Arryns, the very lords who would soon form the storm that swept him from the Iron Throne forever. His reign became one of constant suspicion, petty cruelties, and growing isolation. His mind locked itself in a burning fortress of paranoia. The Mad King had fully arrived. The kingdom groaned under the weight of his madness. The friendships that had held the realm together for centuries were strained to the breaking point. One final horrific act of cruelty was all that was needed to snap the bonds of loyalty for good. The Mad King lit the pyre of his own dynasty with a single dreadful command. The fire he had so loved spread faster than any wildfire could, and the whispers of rebellion in every great hall across the land swelled into a deafening roar. The dragon would not bend, and the realm answered with steel. The defiance of Duskendale had changed Aerys, the second in something the realm no longer recognized. His paranoia grew into a consuming fear of betrayal. He saw enemies everywhere, imagining that every lord in the realm harbored the same traitorous inclinations as Lord Darklyn. The first cracks in the stability of the realm appeared in the humiliations he heaped upon his most capable subject, Tywin Lannister. Yet the ruin of the Targaryen dynasty did not begin with Tywin's wounded pride. It began with a tourney and a crown. At the great tourney at Harrenhal, the Crown Prince Rhaegar Targaryen shocked the realm by naming Lyanna Stark the Queen of Love and Beauty, passing over his own wife, Elia of Dorne. A year later, the prince and the she-wolf of Winterfell disappeared together. Rhaegar's disappearance with Lyanna Stark remains one of the most fiercely debated events in the history of Westeros. Whether it was love or madness, or driven by a prophecy the prince had read in an ancient text, the consequences were immediate and devastating. Lyanna was already betrothed to Robert Baratheon, the young Lord of Storm's End, and a man of immense charisma and equally immense fury. Her brother Brandon, hearing of her abduction, rode straight to the Red Keep, demanding Rhaegar come out and die. Aerys responded by seizing Brandon and his companions. He then summoned their fathers to court. Rickard Stark arrived expecting justice. Instead, the Mad King had him roasted alive in his own armour, while Brandon was forced to watch, strangled trying to save him. With the execution of Lord Rickard Stark and his heir Brandon, Aerys threw away any chance of reconciliation. He demanded the heads of Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon from their foster father, Jon Arryn of the Eyrie. Jon Arryn raised his banners instead. Robert's rebellion had begun, an uprising massive in scale, driven by the combined fury of the North, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, and the Vale united under the leadership of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. They marched to depose a king who had proven himself unfit to rule. The war raged across the southern kingdoms. There were victories and defeats on both sides. Robert won a stunning victory at Ashford, only to be wounded and forced to flee. Yet the rebellion never broke. The momentum shifted after the Battle of the Bells, where the tide turned fully against the crown, and so the fate of the Seven Kingdoms came to rest on the banks of the Trident River. The royal army met the rebel host in a clash that would decide everything. It was a brutal, bloody affair fought in the shallows, swords ringing against armour, horses screaming, the waters of the ford churning into mud and blood. In the centre of the battle, Robert Baratheon and Rhaegar Targaryen faced each other. It was the duel that defined an era. Robert, massive in his antlered war helm, wielded a spiked warhammer that could crush plate steel as if it were parchment. Rhaegar was a skilled knight among the finest of his generation, a master of arms. But skill can only carry a soldier so far against sheer righteous fury. Robert brought his hammer down upon Rhaegar's chest, shattering the rubies that decorated his breastplate. The gems scattered into the river, becoming the rubies of the trident. Rhaegar Targaryen died in the waters of that river, calling out Lyanna's name as the life left him. The moment he fell, the royal army shattered. The rebel lords fell upon the broken ranks, and the war itself was effectively ended. Robert had avenged the insult, and the Targaryen cause was leaderless. News of the battle reached King's Landing before the rebel army. The Mad King, consumed by paranoia, prepared to burn his own city to the ground rather than surrender it. He had hidden caches of wildfire throughout the capital, a plot known only to a few. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister, who had waited the entire war on the sidelines, finally made his move. He marched his 30,000 men to the gates of King's Landing. He presented himself as a loyal lord come to defend the city. The Mad King, in his derangement, actually believed him. He ordered the gates opened. Tywin's army poured into the capital, and the city was sacked brutally. It was not a defense. It was a massacre. Tywin Lannister's betrayal of the Mad King was absolute. He sent his most savage men, Sir Gregor Clegane and Sir Amory Lorch, to the Red Keep with explicit intentions. They found Princess Elia of Dorne and her children. Rhaenys, a little girl no older than 6, was stabbed repeatedly while hiding beneath her father's bed. The babe Aegon was dashed against a wall. Elia herself was raped and murdered. Up in the throne room, King Aerys II sat on the Iron Throne, muttering to himself, convinced the traitors would burn. He commanded his pyromancer to ignite the wildfire. His own Kingsguard, Jaime Lannister, could stand it no longer. He killed the pyromancer, then drove his sword through the back of his own king. Aerys II died upon his throne, his blood pooling on the steps of the seat he had clung to so desperately. The 300-year rule of House Targaryen in Westeros was over. Robert Baratheon arrived to find the city burning and the royal family butchered. He did not order the deaths of the children, but he accepted the prize Tywin had laid at his feet. Robert claimed the Iron Throne as his birthright, a crown born from rebellion and blood. But the Targaryen story was not fully extinguished. As the Lannister men sacked the city, the heavily pregnant Queen Rhaenyra and her son Viserys had been smuggled out of the capital to the Targaryen stronghold of Dragonstone. There, on a storm-tossed island in the narrow sea, Rhaenyra died giving birth to a daughter. The last Targaryen children, Viserys and the infant Daenerys, fled to the free cities of Essos. Their lives as exiles, carrying the memory of a fallen dynasty, would shape the final chapter of this ancient family line. The war was over. Robert Baratheon sat the Iron Throne, a conqueror crowned in the shadow of the Red Keep. But the realm was not yet peace. The dragons were not entirely dead, and in the south, at a lonely tower in the mountains of Dorne, a very different sort of ending was unfolding. On Dragonstone, the last loyal Targaryen garrison held out. Queen Rhaenyra, great with child, had been sent to the island fortress for safety. The night Aerys died in King's Landing. She gave birth to a daughter, Daenerys Targaryen. The queen did not survive the birth. With the storm raging and the fleet of Stannis Baratheon closing in, the Castan, Sir Willem Darry, knew the fortress would fall. He bundled the newborn princess and the young Prince Viserys onto a ship bound for the Free Cities. They escaped, slipping through the blockade just in time. A handful of loyalists, a crown of lost promises, and a lifetime of exile ahead of them. Robert Baratheon, paranoid and vengeful, had no intention of letting the last Targaryens live. He sent assassins, spreading gold across the narrow sea to ensure the end of the line. For young Viserys, it was a fall from grace that broke him. He was a king without a kingdom, raised on tales of greatness and betrayed by reality. Daenerys knew nothing of this life for her first few years. She remembered a house with a red door in Braavos, a lemon tree, and Sir Willem Darry's gentle hands. But Sir Willem grew frail and died, and the servants stole the last of their coin. The exiled heirs were thrown into the streets, penniless, hunted, and alone. This was the fate of the dragon's children. Chased from city to city, they survived on Viserys' charisma and cruelty, and Daenerys' silent endurance. The young prince groomed his sister to be a pawn in his great game of restoration, selling their mother's crown for a few more nights of safety, clinging to the belief that one day they would return. But while the house with the red door collapsed in Braavos, another story was being written in the snow. Ned Stark never spoke of what he found at the Tower of Joy, only that he fought 3 of the finest knights in the 7 kingdoms, and that his sister died in his arms. Lyanna Stark had been taken, or fled, with Rhaegar Targaryen, and in that tower she had given birth to a son. She made Ned promise. "Promise me, Ned. Protect him. Raise him as your own. Keep him safe from Robert's wrath." And Ned, who valued honour above all else, lied for the rest of his life. He claimed the boy was his bastard. Born of a tryst with a woman named Willa, he took the infant, wrapped in the blood-stained cloak of the Kingsguard, and rode north to Winterfell. Robert Baratheon, the usurper, was his friend, but Ned could not trust him with the life of this child. The boy was named Jon Snow, raised in the cold shadow of Winterfell, a constant reminder of a promise and a sin. He grew up with the true-born Stark children, the blood of the dragon running through his veins, hidden beneath the grey Stark livery. He had the Stark look, the long face, the dark hair, but his eyes were a deep, thoughtful grey, sometimes dark as a winter sky. He was a bastard, an outcast, even in the home of his father, but he was Rhaegar Targaryen's son, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, by all the laws of succession, and no one knew. The secret was guarded by a handful of men who took it to their graves. A lord of Winterfell, a green seer in a tree, and a maester who knew the cost of a lie. 2 heirs, then. One dancing with beggar kings on the other side of the world, and one learning to swing a sword in the snows of the north. The bloodline was fractured, but it was not broken. The dynasty that had ruled Westeros for 300 years was gone, its castles sacked, its dragons dead, its name cursed from dawn to the wall. But the blood did not simply vanish. It lingered. It was whispered of in the east, where a forgotten prince grew tall and bitter. It was hidden in the crypts of Winterfell, in the shape of a promise. The Targaryen words were fire and blood. They were not idle words. The power of the bloodline was its resilience. It had survived the doom of Valyria. It had survived the dance of the dragons. It had survived the plague, the rebellion, the usurpers. The legacy of fire and blood was not a throne. It was a prophecy, a song of ice and fire. The last dragon, legend said, would not be the conqueror. It would be the uniter, the promise of a prince that was promised. All the ancient texts, all the visions, pointed to this single thread, woven through the fabric of history, from the day Daenys the dreamer saw the doom. And so we come to the end of our long journey through the lineage of House Targaryen. We began in the shadow of the 14 flames of Valyria, where Dragonlords held power over a continent of wonders. We followed Aenar the Exile to Dragonstone, and Daenys' dream that saved them all. We watched Aegon the Conqueror shape a kingdom from fire and steel, and his descendants struggle to hold it. We witnessed the dance of the dragons, the madness of Maegor, the wisdom of Jaehaerys, the tragedy of Summerhall, and the final mad rage of Aerys the Mad King. And now the story rests on the shoulders of 2 children, scattered by the wind. A king in exile, desperate for a throne he was never meant to hold. A princess sold to a Dothraki Carl, carrying the hopes of a fallen world. And a bastard boy in black, standing on the wall, facing the true enemy. The song of ice and fire is not a song of ruling. It is a song of survival. The blood of the dragon is patient. It waits. It burns. The gods gave the Targaryens dragons, and the dragons gave them the world. But in the end, the only things that survived the fall were a promise whispered in a tower of blood, and a name carried across the sea: fire and blood.